All the stars are here. Barfy Man 169. All the stars are here. Yo, let's go. What's up, y'all? Tonight we're covering Norm Macdonald's comic novel, Based, based on a true story, not a memoir. And this is going to be fun because Norm was our guy, and I've been kind of waiting for a time where we could cover this book because we're covering literature, and Norm's book certainly fits. Norm's book fits into um, this paradigm, into the canon that we're covering here. Because number one, because Norm Macdonald is my favorite of all time, um, and and because I want to cover him, so that's what I'm going to do. But also because this stream is do in wholeheartedly. This stream is thanks to our homeboy out there, the real John Connor, who has been a good friend to me, to the stream, and who has supported me so much. And so this one goes out just to him. It also goes out though to to the Norm fans that we have here, that I know we have, including Jack, DJ, John, Jason. We got a lot of Norm fans, because again, he's our guy. So yes, I want to thank real John Connor so much for supporting me so much. And this one's out to you, homeboy. So this one's going to be a little. I would say this one's going to be a lot lighter than the others, but I got to tell you that rereading the book over last week, it was difficult. It was a difficult read for me because Norm is poignant. His writing it really hits you. It hits you right in your chest. So there was a lot about this book that I had to take it in steps. I could not honestly, usually I can barrel right through a book. And this one I really had to like read it over a couple days because there was a lot in it, especially that knowing what we now know and looking at it in hindsight and kind of going back to Norm. Because a lot of people will say about comedians or people that they listen to, even streamers on the internet, that like in their life when they're going through things as everyone does, that there are certain people that they listen to or whatever that kind of help them get through stuff. And not to be cliche about it, but Norm is that guy for me. He is that guy. And so because there was, everybody goes through whatever. But there was a time in my life specifically um, where I listened to Norm. Where I listened to, I watched him on YouTube, and I read this book every day. I mean, every day. So he really like his humor. His humor really appeals to me, and always has. I mean, I love Norm since I first saw him on SNL when I was a kid. And I've always loved him. So I think this is just fulfilling for me to do this. I'm gonna try to not make this like a Norm fan stream too much because, I just wanna go through the book and talk about the merits of the book, but it's hard not to. So, if you wanna throw in your, if you wanna throw in your Norm comments and your jokes, uh, down there in the chat, then please do so because it'll also help me to there's so many jokes. So, it's hard to keep them all in the old skull. Um, so this one is also this stream tonight is our 1-year anniversary stream. I put up the channel 1 year ago, 1 year and 2 days ago, but our first, stream was exactly 1 year ago today. And if you if you go back and watch, I mean, I couldn't even get the video going. It was only audio because the video on the laptop that I had, at the time wouldn't even work. And so it just shows you, we've come a pretty long way here, because, I couldn't get the video to work, and then I couldn't get the audio calibrated. I mean, we did things pretty organically here, and started off real low tech. And now we've got lights and everybody's here and we're getting up to 2,000 subs. We got about 1,800 now. And we've had a lot of support, and this has been really cool. So before I get started on jumping into the text here, I want to give a special shout out for my 1 year anniversary of this channel to the people that have been the most instrumental in helping me to get this thing going and who helped me from before we even started and who really kind of pushed me along to get it started. And the two people most responsible for that will certainly be our homeboy Jethro out there, who um who really has been you know, the best friend of me and of this channel and helping us get started. And Jerry. Jerry has been both of you guys have been great friends to me and have really helped me along with this. Um, we've had a lot of people who have been pretty instrumental in building us up. And that would be, of course, our homeboy JD over there, Jay Dyer over at Jay's Analysis, Tristan Haggard, of course, Church of the Eternal Logos, our good friend, my good friend over here, Church of the Eternal Logos, David Patrick Harry. Thanks to Chase for coming on recently. Really appreciate that. Thanks to Kristen, who's been here from the very beginning. Thank you to all of my friends, Nate, Real Cooter Brown, OK, Mixkey Technor Graphics. Thanks to Claire and Kim out there. Thanks to my sister. Thanks to Buster and Mom Dukes out there. Uh, and thank you to my in real life friends, my IRL long time lifelong friends, including my very good homeboy, my brother Jake, and to Merch, to Woody out there. Thanks to everybody. Because it's been fun. It's been really fun. So we're gonna keep on going. We got a lot of stuff coming up. And we got a lot of books coming up. I finally got in a bunch of books that I ordered, and some of the ones that we're going to do coming up include we're going to do a we got sponsor streams rolling in left and right, including Paul Thoreau. We're going to do Paul Thoreau's Mosquito Coast. We're going to do more Shakespeare. I've got Titus Andronicus by Shakespeare. We've got Clara Mori by Thomas Harris. We've got the Steven Seagal stream coming up. Seagal book should have been here by now. So that'll be here soon. Then we're gonna do the Steven Seagal movie mega stream. That'll be fun. A bunch. I mean, there's just too much to even mention right now. So let's dive into it. So this book is interesting because it's called based on a true story, not a memoir. Okay. And I figure I'm going to give this as serious as an analysis as I can because it's a funny book. Thank you to Andrew Turner out there who sends $5, says, "Have a Red Bull on me." Thank you so much, homeboy. Appreciate you. I got a bunch of thanks also for people who have sent in super chats and PayPals and all kinds of stuff over the past week. And I got to thank them. So I'm going to get to that in a little bit. And so the book is it's interesting because Norm was on the one hand, he thought it was kind of annoying, but also funny that the book was on the autobiography bestseller list on the New York Times bestseller list for autobiographies because um, it's not an autobiography, and it was on the memoir list, but it's not a memoir, right? It's actually a comic novel, and his what he set out to do was to write a funny book, right? And yes, a lot of it takes from his life, and he said that basically that many people want. Yes, I wouldn't know Super Dave with it. Listen, what I want you to do is go out there in the pompadour. Don't say anything. Okay. I'm not part of this. Yes, DJ says, I wouldn't know Super Dave without Norm. I'm not part of this. Did you just say that? Did you just read that? So RIP to Super Dave. RIP to Bob Saget, right? RIP to Norm, of course. RIP to Gilbert Godfrey. All the great guests that he had on on the Norm podcast. Think how important the Norm podcast is, right? When the Norm podcast came out, I mean, people were, podcasting, but like Norm s like Norm says at the beginning of it, he's like, "Is this a podcast, but we're on video?" I mean, people just weren't doing that. And, Super Dave even, says to him at the beginning, Super Dave's the first guest, and Super Dave says to him, "You're doing this. Who's watching this? There's 15 people. You should have a show on a network. Get this guy's show on a network." Norm says, "Oh, that's very nice. We lost our sponsors," he says, right? So, think how important that is because Norm was ahead of the pack in that sense, way ahead of the pack. I mean, I don't even think Rogan was kicking big. Like, he wasn't even that, and Rogan had his thing going, I think, when Norm started, his video podcast. But, like, that was it's so it really is, you look back and it's so high concept, um, and how influential it was, how many people probably decided to do their thing after watching. I mean, you know, he made me wanna go on and to talk about him. So, um, okay, so the book yeah, back to the book. Norm thought that it was interesting that, um, it was on the, bestseller list when it's just a comic novel, and really what it is like a mix between the obvious elements like Hunter S. Thompson, right? It's kind of a Hunter S. Thompson, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. There are elements of it, in that, but also it's surrealist, and there's also kind of a magical realist element in it. We just talked about magical realism, in the last couple of streams, but there's like a magical realist element and it's sort of a fairy tale element to the book because yes, it's the story of a comic named Norm Macdonald who is a Saturday Night Live um, star, star of the Weekend Update, who coins the term fake news. That's Norm Macdonald coined that term, right? Fake news, and who is a gambling junkie, but the rest is sort of, and he's from northern Canada, walking through streets of Manhattan through blood and bone, trying to find his brother who was in northern Canada. Yeah, there's elements of Dostoevsky in here as well. Remember, we covered when did we cover Dostoevsky with Tristan? We covered Dostoevsky and we covered Solzhenitsyn. But Norm was really into um literature. He was extremely well read and puts on this air of humility. I mean, he was a humble person, but puts on this air of humility where, I'm not a smart guy, I'm not an educated guy, and he was kind of an autodidact. And that comes through in his like, in the way that he talks and the way that he does interviews because he also he was ahead of he was sort of ahead of the curve. He had dementia at the end, right? He says to Larry King, um, "Oh, Norm, if you wanna work on a major network, you probably shouldn't say things like that." "What? What? I thought it was funny that you said he was a great guy, he had dementia at the end." Um, yeah, so Norm was, sincere and understood literature in a way that most academics lack. Um, you notice when you come to read when you come to be when you come from university, from higher education, from academia, that really the difference between the artist and the scholar talking about art, with the exception of Harold Bloom, is that they lack the excitement and the passion, right? The passion that comes with wanting to, talk and write about literature for, as your life's work, which is why anybody would get into it, but it's like sort of a lot of these people lose that. Harold Bloom, of course, never lost that. He was a remember I told you guys I sat next to him at the Audrey and Rich reading at the 92nd Street Y in New York? I mean, he was a passionate guy. Um And Norm did this and absorbed it in the way that, the comedian is kind of the neo-philosopher, right? And Norm himself, commented on this. He said it was funny how, like, when he went on shows like Bill Maher, he would be on there and he would be talking to, he'd be sitting next to the guy who was, like, the expert on China, right? Who's the ambassador to China or whatever. And that guy would make the jokes, and then they would ask Norm the questions about geopolitics, and "I don't know. I just tell jokes." And it was funny how Bill Maher did that, and they still kind of do that. But what is sort of doubly ironic about that is that Norm, of course, is far more Norm or any of the great, new, comedians of our era, like Sam Hyde, are far more insightful and philosophical, in terms of their worldview than the the philosophers are now, right? I mean, um, look at Jay, look at Sam Hyde, look at Norm. So humor is a way of cutting through the bullshit, right? And also looking at life like with trying to appreciate life because life is funny. And okay, so enough of that. Let's discuss the book. So I'm going to read the forward here by Louis C.K. Because, yeah, Sam is live right now, and Sam's always live. He's live, like, 3 times a week. Sam and the Nick are always live now, which is really cool that we're in this time where that is, like, occurring again. I watch Sam all the time. So, Louis CK, he reads the forward, and let me see. Here are the first, let me read the epigraphs. So the epigraphs, the first one says, "Three Fingers whiskey pleasures the drinkers. Moving does more than that drinking for me. Willie, he tells me that doers and thinkers say moving's the closest thing to being free." And that, of course, is by Billy Joe Shaver and his song Willie the Wandering Gypsy and Me, right? I'm just an old chunk of coal, but I'll be a diamond someday. That one, see, that's, I'm trying not to. That one, see, that one hits me. That one really hits me. That one, that quote really gets to me, because it's true. The next one is, "To live outside the law, you must be honest." That's Bob Dylan. Absolutely, Sweet Marie. And then finally, Tolstoy. "I know of only two very real evils in life, remorse and illness." Now, I mean, I'm not gonna try and I'm not gonna spend much time talking about Norm's illness, and, because I think that the way it happened is exactly how he how he intended, and that's the way that we should go about it. But it is poignant to look back and think that that's the epigraph to the book, knowing what we know now about, Norm's situation at the time. So, Forward is by Louis C.K. I first saw Norm Macdonald on stage in 1988. I was 21 years old, and he came to headline a club in Boston where I'd been doing stand up for 3 years. Me and my friends had heard about him, so I went to check him out. Within 2 minutes, I was astonished by how funny he was, just blown away. I laughed harder that night than I had in my life. I remember my comedian friends and I just sat and talked about him for hours after the show. I went back to see him 5 times during the week he was at the club. He instantly became my favorite comedian in the 30 years since. He's never stumbled far from that rank. Every time I see or hear Norm, he's doing something new and better than the last time. He gives me a new favorite comedy bit. The thing that drives me nuts about Norm is the powerful simplicity of his style. A lot of comics, myself included, swagger around the stage and fly into contrived bits of anger that drive them an air of dynamic importance. Norm has a beguiling humility that sneaks up and grabs you by the throat. It's a great word to describe Norm, right? Beguiling, a beguiling humility. There is something about how simply Norm says things on stage, just lays words end to end with such elegance. And then you just explode with laughter and you just can't stop. You're just standing there talking and you're howling and trying to breathe, your head in your lap. The power in that is amazing. So that's interesting because Norm has talked about how the difference in comedians. So for one, he talks about the difference between, for example, Letterman and Leno. Right now, Letterman was obviously Norm's guy. Letterman was instrumental in getting him a show, after he was after he was canceled from SNL because of his, OJ bits, right? Uh, but he talks about how Leno, he says, "Look, it's everybody's favorite thing to make fun of Leno and to do the voice, They wanna do the Leno voice, but people fail to understand why Leno is Leno, like, why he became the host, right? Why he had this talk show that was so popular and lasted for so long, and that's because as a stand-up, he was incredible. He said that Leno, especially in the '80s, was like he was like Elvis on stage. He was like this, kind of like he had this beast energy where he just kinda stalked around the stage and his jokes were like rapid fire, and it's just 2 different types of comedians, I mean, yeah, like, I think that for me personally, like, Letterman Letterman is kinda my guy in the sense that Norm's insight into Letterman is particularly brilliant. Norm says at one point, he says he figured out Letterman. He figured out his deal and his talk show and why it worked. He said that, um, the guests were on and the audience was there, but the guests were he said the guests were the joke, right? And that the audience was in on the joke, like, without knowing that they were in on the joke, but that at times only Letterman was in on the joke, but it's like a secret deal between Letterman and the viewer, because for instance, an example is like when you have, a guest on who, like, is not that Letterman laughs at. Well, he's laughing at the guest because especially when you're a kid and you watch these shows, you see these, like, huge Hollywood people go on, and you're like, "Oh, these people are big," and, it's like, "Oh, Letterman gets to meet all these big stars, and he's a talk show host and everything." But see, to him, they aren't really important. They're just guests on a show, and it doesn't matter as long as it's funny, as long as they are the joke. Leno's different because for me, like, Leno is kind of like, more comfortable. It's like more comfort viewing. Like the way the aesthetic in the studio worked, the watching Letterman on CBS, it's like the big audience, there's like an echo in the audience. So it's like a big performance, but it's like the small stage, but there's a big performance. For Leno, it's like pure television. So, yeah, Crack Willow says, I'm sure Norm said that Letterman changed how people talk. Well, I think that, um, that one thing that Conan gets with Norm is he gets his sensibility in a way that is more sort of person to person than Letterman does, because they're both kind of the same generation. Um, and no, Conan is good with like the rhythm that Norm has, and the best, obviously, the best, the best Letterman ever was Norm's final. Was when Norm was on there because that was Leno's, farewell. I mean, Letterman's farewell week. And, Norm he chose Norm as, the final stand-up act, and, Norm's jokes are so the Germany joke is so amazing because it's like it's so obvious, but it's unexpected, right? And, and then, of course, Norm talked about it, he says, "I didn't intend to cry at the end," but, he says, "Letterman, you have no, truck with the sentimental, but I love you." Right? That's amazing. Um, so anyway, so let's see. Oh, there's one Louis CK bit that I remember. There's only one bit that I ever remember from Louis CK. And I never really watched the show or anything. But the only bit that I remember that I thought was so funny was when he hosted SNL and he was doing his monologue and, and he said he said he said, "I'm really hungry right now. I'm like I'm like I'm first world hungry. I'm not third world hungry." Like he says people in the first world, like they always say like, "I'm starving to death. I'm starving to death." But he says like, "I'm not like actually starving to death. Like I could use a donut." And I thought that was so perfect. That was also like the first time that I think first world was like really put into the public sort of vocabulary. Okay, so I know talking about the jokes doesn't really do them justice. It's not that funny when you're talking about them. You just have to go back and listen to the jokes. So I'm just gonna try and get through some more of the book here and talk about what happens in the book. He says, let's see. Okay, so the introduction of the book, it says, "Found alive in a hotel room in Edmonton." Okay, you're dead. The hell I am. They'll see. I've heard this kind of talk before. How I'm finished, through, obsolete, passé, yesterday's news, a has been, a fossil. I'll have you know I'm just as relevant today as I was 25 years ago. No, no, my agent laughs through the phone like it's the greatest joke in the world. Check your Wikipedia page. You're dead, all right. I look around the room and see the small bottles that are scattered everywhere. Those small bottles that make me feel so big. They're empty now, of course, just like me. My suitcase is in the corner. Same one I've had my whole career, and it's all beat to hell. Stitching coming out of the sides, but it still does its job, sort of. Stand up comedy is a shabby business made up of shabby fellows like me who cross the country, stay at shabby hotels, and tell jokes they no longer find funny. You show up in a strange town, and the next thing, you're gone. Then another town, and another, then a thousand more, then another. You're moving, always moving, like a criminal drifter, getting what you can from a place and then getting out. You're never in one place long enough to experience anything but the shabbiest of love. I turned to the girl next to me in bed. I must have met her last night at the comedy club where they had a great tall picture of me leaning against the door to remind the people what a big shot I once was. Her hair is bright yellow, her lips are bright red, and she'll wake up soon and I'll pretend that I remember her. I make my way quietly through the dim room to the wide open minibar. It's empty, but for one tiny bottle way at the back. I always leave one. I drink her dry, the way a man puts gas in his car when the tank's near empty, just to keep going a little longer down the endless road, damn near 50. Now look, all that see, this is all a novel. It's none of this is real. I mean, it's real how he, was it's kind of like a criminal drifter life, the life of the stand-up, but Norm really articulates what a stand-up is and what it means better than any comedian I've ever heard. And and, you know, eh, I think that Norm's encyclopedic knowledge of comedy is unparalleled. I mean, you could that's why they got him as a host on you remember when they had what was it? Like, what was it? What do you call it? The comedy competition, the thing that was like, not Dancing with the Stars. All the stars are here. Um, it was where he was the host. And do you remember when he was the host on that show and he kind of was the Simon character, like an American Idol for comedians? I forget the name of the damn show. Anyway, um, and the guy told do you remember when the guy this was based right here. The guy told the joke and he made he like the butt of the joke was the was Christianity. And he said something about, oh, a guy said to him something about, "Oh, I'm gonna, go to church." And then he said, "Oh, well, I'll take out my Harry Potter." And like everybody laughed. Last comment standing. Thank you. Thank you, Jerry. And then Norm says to him, I don't think that joke was funny at all. Um, I don't think that you making fun of Christianity, making fun of our Lord is very funny. In fact, the joke doesn't even work because apparently J.K. Rowling, is a good, set, compare, tried to make a comparison or, uses Harry Potter as a kind of a Christ-like hero. Now, whether that's the case or not, and, I mean, Harry Potter is the story of the young Al Crowley, but Norm was right in the sense that at least her intention, as stated in an interview, what he knew, was the case. So in other words, the joke didn't work, and he thought it was cheap. So in other words, one thing that Norm articulates well, and not to bring in drama school about this, but one thing that I learned important about comedy acting at drama school was that, and I had this old fella who was he was an improv teacher at drama school, and this old fella, he was a bit an important guy. I mean, um, he had trained Patrick Stewart and, Brian Blessed and Jeremy Irons and all these people. Anyway, we had to do this impro you call it improv over there, improv skit for class one day, and one of the things he told me, when he criticized me was he said, "Your comedy bit was funny, but it wasn't really funny." And I was like, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Well, it was funny to the people in the room, and if you were doing it on stage in a theater, it may even have been funny to them, but it wasn't really funny because at the at they were laughing at you being funny. You when you play comedy or when you tell jokes, I guess when you're a stand-up, um, it has to be funny in the sense that you believe what you're saying." And I've mentioned this before about music and about the great musicians and the great singers, right? Is that, uh, when you listen to the great singers, and who was I listening to last night? Oh my god, I was listening to somebody last night. I turned on the first 5 seconds of the song and I went, "Holy shit." Um, I forget who it was, but when you listen to the great singers, they you have the words on the page and you're reading the words. But just like in a musical, um, you have to believe the words that you're saying. They have to be you have to your character has to only know that as the truth. There's no concept of you're dialing into a character. The character, that is the character, and those are the words that come to mind spontaneously as they think. They can't be rehearsed, if that makes sense. So when you sing, it's like you're breathing or you're speaking the words of the song, the lyrics in the song, but you have to, like, own them in a way where you're singing around the notes. You're not singing on the notes like you do when you're 5, right? Um, like when you're learning a song when you're in school and you learn the notes of the song and you sing the notes where they go. They go up, they go down, and it's not like that. And it's so well done when you listen to the great musicians because it's like it's almost telegraphed to us. It's almost like an invisible thing that you don't even notice because they do it so well. It's the same thing with comedians and it's the same thing with comedy. The I mean, look, a kind of a cheap example of this that I'll give is like, it is like, the what's the Fockers movie, the Robert De Niro movie? Meet the Fockers, Meet the Parents. Okay, so here's a good example. The reason that say what you will about, De Niro or that movie or whatever, but the first time you watched it, especially back then, the reason that De Niro started having, like, a career as a comic actor was that when you watch the movie, like, he's not, um he is not, like, pla in a way, in the sequels, he kinda does this. He plays De Niro, like, playing the comic role, which is kind of a self-reference, but in the original one, it really works because he is sincere in his character. In other words, like, he is the dad in the movie, right? He's the dad, and he's, like, spying on, Fokker or whatever, he don't want him and he's got this whole espionage business on the side or whatever, and he's doing that's the subplot, right? But the character believes that, right? It's like, we're not watching him having fun, um, with the role, we're actually watching him be in the role, and that's why it works. And Norm is like this in terms of, you know, his joke telling is so original because it's unexpected. And I'm going to get to like the dynamics of what makes the perfect joke for Norm in a little bit. But in terms of his writing right here, the introduction of this book is you immediately you're drawn into it because you believe the character, right? You believe the speaker. And Norm understood that when writing a narrative, even if you're going to write an autobiography, somehow the when you put the pen to the page, you create a character that's different from yourself. So I assume what he did was he got pitched or he pitched a book deal to write a memoir. He started writing a memoir and then he realized that he was creating a character and that it really wasn't him. So he went with that instead of like writing about what it's like backstage at SNL because as Norm said, like, people always wanted to know, like, what is it like backstage? And he's like, "Backstage sucks. Backstage is like me standing there eating a sandwich, getting ready to go on stage. It sucks. On stage is the fun part, right? The man great, he weighs like 100 pounds. Um, so so this character here is the speaker. The speaker, Norm Macdonald, is not Norm Macdonald the comedian. This is a separate character, Norm Macdonald. For some examples of that are like the fact that he wakes up and looks at the girl in the bed next to him. Like I guarantee you, that's like not Norm. I mean, Norm was a ladies' man, and in fact, apparently, um, had some pretty like Elle Macpherson and some pretty, so the women really liked him. And of course, he did this cool thing where people would ask him about it, and he would say, "Come on, man, you don't want me talking about that filth on here. You being filthy." The other thing is the drinking, the mini bar. Like Norm didn't drink. I'm sure he did drink, early on, like when he's on Tom Green and stuff, when Tom Green had his early internet show, which is also pretty cool. The fact that and I remember when that was live, when Tom Green had this internet show, like, from his house, and it was, like, the late '90s, early 2000s, and you're like, "This is so awkward. This will never last. This is not cool. It's cool for the novelty." And now that's what everything is, which is pretty cool, and Norm was there with him, right? So he says and then he says, "Damn near 50." Well, Norm always, lied about his age, of course. and he lied about, "This is my son, David." Right? His son's name is Dylan. Um, but Norm, did you know he was born in 1959? So, you know, he says, over at the table, I hit a couple of buttons on my computer and discover what my agent found so funny. Some joker has changed my Wikipedia page, all right, and he's left me for dead. Norm Macdonald, October 17th, 1963. There you go. The May 12th, 2013, was a comedian and an actor who was known from, I read on and on till the final sentence, death sentence. Get the pun? Mr. McDonald was found dead in an Edmonton hotel room from an overdose of morphine. Well, that's a sight to see, all right, with all the authority of the internet behind it. I'm standing stock still in the very same Edmonton hotel room where I died the night before. And then I start to laugh, and I laugh to beat all get out, just like my agent did, just because I'm alive and I can. Then a thought comes to me and it's sudden, a thought that stops all my laughing, makes me real cold, and has me craving a couple of grains of morphine or at least some whiskey. And the thought is this: the preposterous lie on the screen before me isn't that far off. After all, the only thing this Joker really did was change tenses, turned does to did, and is to was. He got the date of my passing wrong for sure, but nothing else, right? To misquote Twain, it turns out the rumor of my death is only slightly exaggerated. Now, Norm is great because, you know, they give the comedy award every year as the Mark Twain Award. And I mean, honestly, there's no one closer in terms of the spirit of Mark Twain and wit, kind of wit and sophisticated humor, even when it's unsophisticated, which is the ironic thing. Even Norm's l- lowbrow, like his like the leper joke, right? Which is turns out to be a kind of a meta joke, um, that is pretty filthy, but it's sophisticated because of its buildup, because it is supposed to be this poignant story about, like, forlorn love and death, and and Norm is able to pull that off. So there's no one really there's no one closer to Mark Twain, than Norm Macdonald, and Norm always also got like, he was asked about people like Lenny Bruce, right? And he's obviously doing the Lenny Bruce thing here, but he was asked about people like Lenny Bruce or, what's the other guy? What's the what's the other guy's name? Bill Hicks. And Norm would always say, "Have you ever watched Bill Hicks?" He'd be like, "Look, Norm didn't really think Bill Hicks was that funny." And I get what he means by that. It's like, okay, I get the novelty of it and the sort of, the political humor, right? Or like how George Carlin is funny. I mean, George Carlin is not like George Carlin is, like, true and, and he's funny in the sense that the way that he says things are funny, but he's not like a comedian like Norm is funny. Does that make sense? So he says, um the girl on the bed is beginning to stir now, and I feel sorry for her the same way I feel sorry for myself every time I have to wake up. I struggle to remember her name, but it's no good. And as I look at her and wonder who we were last night, I come up with a title for my book. I'll call it Based on a True Story because it comes to me that there's no way of telling a true story. I mean, a really true one because of memory. It's no good. It's like when a guy's telling a story and he's way off and you know he is because the whole story's about you, but he's changing it all around, leaving out important parts and making up others from whole cloth, doing whatever he has to do to turn the dead stuff into life and something worth telling. And you'd correct him, but the thing is, you're not you're not sure you remember it 100% accurately yourself. It turns out memory isn't the precise court stenographer you think it is, getting every word just down so. It's more like the sketch artist way at the back of the courtroom who's doing his level best to capture images that no longer are. So Norm does a really incredible thing here because what he's doing here is he's saying that he's not going to tell a true story in the sense that it's a real story or a factual story, but it's going to be a true story. And we've said that from the beginning of this channel that a lot of the stuff that we cover is not exactly factual in terms of literature or um, not exactly like real or realistic or naturalistic, but it is more true than the factual events. And that's what Norm's saying here, that when people tell stories, like you're telling a story about your buddy, you're hanging out with the fellas, and you're like, you remember when he did this? And you embellish certain bits, there's hyperbole, there's exaggeration, but those bits, even though they make the story funny, they make the story more true to the spirit of what happened than just a recounting or recap of the physical events. So it won't be a true story. It'll be based on a true story, like every story I've ever told. But I promise you this, it'll be the truth. Every word of it to the best of my memory. And I won't just scratch the surface either. No, sorry, Bob. I'll claw and tear into the showbiz career of mine, and I'll let the filth fly like a mad dog digging up bones he buried deep and long ago. And I'll name names and I'll drop shells. And I bet they'll pay good money for that kind of thing for the straight dope on the Hollywood crowd and the SNLers too. And I need money. I need money to live. I'm near 50. I open the curtains and it's raining outside. I catch an image of myself in the window, and the rain blurs my thin reflection as if I'm barely there at all. And I see there's a bruise under my left eye and some dried blood. I look down at my hand, and the heel of my thumb is swollen purple and hurts like a bastard, and that makes me happy. It means the girl on the bed was fought for and not bought. Damn, that is so good. That is so good. Like, that's this is real writing. This is like this is manly. This is like, you know, it's like noir, and it's like noir mixed with an adventure story, mixed with like a man's man, right? And it's virtuous. He says she's full awake now, and she's holding her head and squinting, and I watch her as she sees me. I can tell she doesn't remember anything either. Well, that's okay. I hear all about it later from the guy who runs the comedy club, and I'll sit and listen, transfixed to the forgotten details of last night and shake my head, bewildered, feeling like a trespasser in my own life. I look at the girl squarely. I'll get us a bottle. She has a pretty smile. That's the end of the introduction. The "I'll get us a bottle" thing is funny because that's also a Norm joke. He says, the way that his celebrity friends, pick up girls in the clubs or whatever is the girls always come up to him, and they don't really have to say much, to because they're celebrities or whatever. But Norm is so awkward with all that stuff, and so all his way of picking up a girl is he walks up to her, kind of sidles up beside her. He's sidling up beside her, and he says, "I can get us a bottle," right? Before he goes back to his hotel room, turns off the lights, and likes to lie down on top of her for a few minutes. That's what he says. So, all right, so Norm then goes back in time. He goes to his first job interview, and basically he says he is a cosmopolite from Toronto, worldly, the kind of guy who'd be comfortable around the Queen of England herself. Me, I was a hick, born to the barren, rocky soul of the Ottawa Valley, where the richest man in town was the barber. Lorne was a big shot, and I was a small fry. And that's why I was planning on doing very little talking in his job interview. So he goes into his job interview with Lorne Michaels, and guess how he gets his job? Guess how he gets the job. He says, he says, "Listen, Lorne, I do have one character I've been working on, and I think it'll be a big hit, the biggest. But I don't want to do it down in the studio where some bum might steal it and take it for his own. I want to do it just for you, right here and now." Lorne looked up to me with that stare of his that passeth all human understanding. "Go ahead, Norm." I reached inside my back pocket and pulled out a bag containing 7 grams of government grade morphine and 2 brand new cigarettes and tossed them on the desk. "I call this character the Connection. Norm, I confess that your antics are near amusing. But this is not what we at the show refer to as a character. Do you know what we call this at the show, Norm?" "No, sir. What?" "A recurring character. I was in." So, so So Norm's so Norm's idea of how he got the job with Lauren is, that he became his morphine connection, which is obviously not true, but is true, if that makes sense, right? Because it's the spirit of it. Now, I know that the way Norm actually got his job at Saturday Night Live was basically that you're asked to do, he thought he was gonna be a shoo-in for the job because they had called him and they liked his writing, and then they asked him to do a character, right? And he was like, "I can't do characters." And throughout Norm's career, he always talked about, like, how he couldn't do impressions or characters because the one thing that people didn't understand was that when you do characters on TV, they set you up with, like, a mask and a costume, right? And that allows you to play this character, and so he I think he hated it when people would ask him to, like, do Burt Reynolds when he was doing stand-up. He's like, "No, I'm doing stand-up now. That's TV. Those are characters with costumes and masks." Right. Um, but Norm actually got his work, um, he got his work on Saturday Night Live because he actually got his start, if you didn't know this, he got a start as a writer for Roseanne, writing on I think it might have been the 1st season of Roseanne. And that's pretty I don't know if it's prescient, but remember when Roseanne was canceled a few years ago? They had the reboot of the Roseanne show, and then they canceled her from her own show, and, and I remember they were asking Norm actually went back on The View, after all those years, and he talked about, Roseanne, and it was pretty amazing because, I think that the reason that Roseanne is probably making a comeback now is because Norm stood up for her years ago, and what happened was if you go back and watch the interviews, it's amazing because, um, he's there, in a suit and tie, and this is like older Norm, okay? And they said, "What about Roseanne?" And he said, "Yeah, I talk to Roseanne all the time. I talk to her every day." And, and I don't like, what she said or whatever was he said is irrelevant to me because that she said it, right? I mean, it's not up to me to not like to disavow or whatever what she said because she's my friend and because we're all human and we all make mistakes and you don't know the pain that she's gone through as a result of this. And so yeah, I mean that's essentially what he said. And I remember that like from the beginning of the show of that episode, because I watched the Norm episode of it, of The View that he was this Norm was on it. And I remember that from the beginning of that episode to the end, the, like, viewpoint of Roseanne, like, completely changed because of him. Um, and I think that's probably why she's coming back. Um, remember Roseanne has a connection, in a way to one of our friends, and that would be our good friend, Rachel Based Homeschool Mama, who, um, has been doing research for her book and, talked to, the legendary Kathy O'Brien, and Kathy O'Brien is, like, best friends with Roseanne, and they both remember Kathy O'Brien, and her Most Dangerous Game, talks, her real life Most Dangerous Game talks, and about Monarch, and Roseanne introduced her at that one time. I've seen that video a million times. Um, Elias says, 4.99. Thank you for that. Appreciate you, homie. Says, Norm had one of my favorite quotes. Imagine that. The good guys won every single war. um, so I'm gonna get to what makes Norm's quips so funny, especially why he was such an effective um, weekend update host, because he really was good at dissecting and understanding the philosophy of what makes a joke funny. Um, so so Norm goes on to get a job at SNL, but first he talks about his life in Canada. Oh, okay. So I got to cover this. because it's the first appearance of Adam Eget. He says he he says he takes on his sidekick, Adam Eget, whom he discovered, under the Queensboro Bridge, jerking off punks for $15 a man, which is an old joke. But Adam Eget is funny because what he represents is the sidekick who doesn't give anything back. So sorry. Norm wanted a sidekick, especially for his podcast, that was kind of an Ed McMahon figure, right? A guy that would laugh, but not really give anything back. And a lot of times, so what happens, like with Conan and various with various sidekicks, is that the sidekick ends up like making a joke back, and it ends up not being very funny because it's not really the Abbott and Costello routine. Like you need, Norm talks about this. Like you need the tall, skinny guy and the short, fat guy, right? And that's what he has in Dirty Work, right? When Artie Lang is his sidekick. Um, so that the contrast is what's funny. Um, tell us, where do you get your jokes? Where do you get your ideas from? Are you serious? Are you serious? If you ask another question, that's stupid. Like, where do you get your ideas from? All right, so on page 9, Norm says, he says, "Well, then it sounds like you're due," I tell him, and then to punctuate my fine joke, I make a comically oversized I take a comically oversized swig from my bottle. The plain truth is that Adam Eget is an alcoholic, and that's why he doesn't drink. Me, I'm an alcoholic, and that's why I do. I'm not an alcoholic, and that's why I do drink. Life sure is funny that way. But my heart goes out to Adam Eget because an addiction is a deep hook. And sometimes the harder you wriggle to escape her, the deeper she goes. So insightful. I should know because I've got one of my own. I like to gamble money on games of chance. And some have said that it's been the ruin of me. Go up and do a set. They'll love you. They're a great crowd. So they're saying, you're saying they're such a great crowd that they'll even love the likes of me? No, that's not what I'm saying. Come on, Norm. As a favor to me, I promise they'll get a big kick out of it. There's a lady up on stage now, and she's saying the most unladylike things. Quite shocking. The folks in the crowd are looking at each other astonished. They can hardly believe what they're hearing, and I can tell that they don't know what to do, so they decide to laugh. Fine, I say, I'll do a set. Now, this is pretty big because this is something that we all know now. And you remember Jay did one of my favorite Jay videos is where he is talking about he's he he was in his baked Alaska outfit and he's watching the Paula Poundstone video and he's showing the female stand-ups. And this is kind of a riff on Norm because uh on one talk show they told Norm that there was a lady at Saturday Night Live and they showed a clip from her interview and she's like, "Well, when I got to Saturday Night Live, Norm was supposed to be my guide through the industry and through Saturday Night Live and how to get by." And Norm's like, her guide? How am I supposed to be her guide? How am I supposed to first of all, I'd have to teach a woman how to be funny, he says. So so Norm made a good point though about a lot of female stand-up comedians, which is that instead of telling jokes, they tend to talk about filthy things, Norm says. Maddie says for 4.99, will you rank your top 5 comedians for us? That's pretty tough. I mean, my favorite comedian obviously is Norm Macdonald. He's by far, I mean, he's like one of my heroes. I love Norm Macdonald, obviously, right? um, who do I think is probably the best stand-up comedian of all time? Well, I kind of have different categories. Um, I crack You said Greg Giraldo. I read that as Geraldo, and I was so fucking mad. Excuse my language, because that's all a separate thing. Um, no, Norm is the best comedian. Um, The greatest stand-up comedian of all time is Rodney, because Rodney is all jokes. He is rapid fire blitzkrieg all jokes, and they just kill. Now, regardless of if they're old or whatever, I mean, there is nobody like Rodney. He's just the comedian's comedian. He is like he embodies what the uncomfortable, stand-up comedian is. Um, I only who? Cosby? I only like Cosby, because of Norm's joke about Cosby, right? So, I know people watching this probably know, about Norm's Cosby bit, but he says to summarize, he says that, he met Cosby one time, backstage, and Cosby, he told Cosby, was talking to him, and Cosby was like, "Yo, what about, oh, your dad, your mom, your dad?" And he told him that, he told him all about his dad, and, then he realized afterwards that his dad was dead. Um, and so then later when Cosby was, like, in Edmonton or wherever it was in Ottawa, he was looking up his dad's address, and he couldn't find him in the phone book, and that he called Norm, and he's like, "I can't find your dad in the phone book. What's his phone number?" And so Norm gave him, like he, like, gave him a fake phone number or whatever, and then anyway, long story short, um, finally, he got to a room, and he said, and that Bill Cosby had, like, not let this go and had sent flowers in memory of his dad. And he says he was a nice man. Everybody in the audience is like, kinda silent, and Norm says, "Well, this is before I knew he was I didn't know that he was, he didn't give me a drink with blue water that was fizzing in it. He was just a guy." Right. Um, my favorite stand-up, uh my favorite comic, like, set of all time is Martin Lawrence, "You So Crazy." I've seen it like a million times. I think that there is no better complete stand-up act than Martin Lawrence's "You So Crazy." It is the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life, and I've seen it a million times, and maybe it's just that it's because my type of humor, but I can watch it from start to finish and laugh the entire time, and it's just perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Like, the way that he is physically, his jokes, his you gotta lock it, snap it, and break it off. I mean, he's so funny. Um, who do I think is like, who are some other funny people? I don't know. I don't know. I think Martin Lawrence and Rodney and Norm are great. Okay. So let's see. So he says, "I shamble onto the stage. In stand up, what you wear is very important. Some comics wear a pair of jeans and a t shirt, trying to look like a regular Joe so the crowd will relate to them. Others take the stage sporting a $10,000 suit as a sign of respect for the folks who came to hear them. Me, I wear just the same thing I wear off stage: a Norm show t shirt, an SNL jacket, and a dirty work hat. I figure in show business, it never hurts to remind the folks just exactly who you are. I open with my surefire bit about answering machines, and the crowd doesn't get a big kick out of it at all. I continue to talk, and the words come out the same way they have for 30 years, but those words are only on my lips. In my mind, a plan is hatching." So Norm's well, I mean, the greatest living comedian, I think, is is probably Nick Mullen. I mean, I think Nick Mullen is like he's like a comedian's comedian. He's like he has the kind of encyclopedic knowledge about comedy itself that Norm had. I think Nick Mullen is so funny. Um, but that's like stand up, right? I mean, there are other people that are funny. Like just talking and what they do, Sam and Nick are the best. But I think that, yeah, that red cap that says sports is amazing. Shane Gillis, good point, Jerry. Shane Gillis is amazing. I mean, that whole crop of people is great. Like, because Nick and Shane Gillis and the way that Adam, works with them is funny. Yeah, The Adam Friedland Show, I think, is, like, awesome. I actually watched it all weekend, and that's kind of like my comfort viewing now because I can watch I mean, like, I watched the episode with, Ariel Pink, like, 3 times this weekend. I've seen the one with Shane Gillis, like, 100 times already. It just is so funny. But I also especially like it when they're talking about just when they're sitting around talking and they're like, Master and Commander is the best fucking movie. That movie rocks so hard. Like, that's our movie. That movie's for us, right? That movie's for us. They're like, "This is our guy." That's why I like listening to them, because I totally agree about that. Yeah, Shane Gillis rules. So, anyway, at the end here of this chapter, he gets the Challenger. He says, "Adam, you could get the Challenger, and we're gonna head off. We're gonna go gamble." He says, "I remember," and that's that. Adam Eget just shakes his head and looks real sick. He's certainly about to lose his job and everything he's worked to achieve. The simple fact is, Adam Eget has a debt unpaid. It's 2 decades old, but I'm calling in my markers. So what choice does he have? He just nods his head a little and makes his way to the parking lot as I finish the bottle of Wild Turkey 101 and smile at the simple perfection of the plan that came from God Himself and revealed itself to me in the unlikeliest of places. Adam Eget pulls the car around and I get in. He drops me off at Sullivan's boarding house. I pack all my Norm Show t-shirts, dirty work hats, and SNL jackets while he waits in the car. Then we are gone, moving fast, tearing the tar off Highway 15 all the way to Las Vegas, Nevada, aiming the white Challenger directly into the blood red moon like a snowball rolling straight to hell. Now that is a clear reference to Hunter S. Thompson and the Great Shark Hunt and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas because of the Great White Shark and um and the white whale, right? Except in my note says except they're going east to west versus west to east like they do in Fear and Loathing. And but that's because in the narrative here, they're doing something clever. Norm is going instead of going west to east, right? He's going east to west, which is kind of the great American experience, east to west, right? Go west, young man. And also because he's going into the setting sun like he's going backwards into his memory, which is what he does in the narrative, which is pretty clever. Hey, Amtown, what's up? Good to see you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Um, um, Yeah, Norm's got a he has a good take also on Ricky Gervais and The Office. I don't know if you guys ever watched The Office, the original Office. I watched it because when I lived in England, it was on TV. It was like it was new. It was a new show and it came on every week and I would watch that with my flatmates. Shouts out to Steph out there, to Steph and Heather and all them. And and to my best friend over there, Jeff. And what's amazing, just a little side note here is that my best friend from drama school, Jeff, is doing really well. He's in the Royal Shakespeare Company, and he's doing so well. And then over the weekend, I decided to rewatch a show called The Fall on it's on Amazon. I think it was originally maybe on Netflix, but it's on Amazon Prime. And it stars Jamie Dornan, who was the star of the movie Belfast, which, of course, was nominated for Best Picture this year. He plays the dad in it, and he was in 50 Shades of Grey. But Jamie Dornan went to Methody, which is, the private school right across from Queens, where I went to university, and, he's 3 years younger than me, and so I watched the show, The Fall, because it's about a, serial killer in Belfast, and I liked watching it because it's a really well done show. It has Gillian Anderson from, The X-Files in it, and it's filmed all in Belfast. Now that's pretty cool because, um, like, they didn't start filming films or shows there until, like, I was in grad school. Even up to then, they still weren't filming things there because they couldn't film for instance, like, one of the movies that made me go, over to university there, like, finally, was watching Daniel Day-Lewis in The Boxer. The Boxer is a fantastic movie. I talked about that with, Nick from, Green Feathers. but that wasn't filmed there, it was filmed in Dublin because you couldn't film movies about paramilitary activity or anything in Belfast because obviously because it was, real, it was still going on. So, and I auditioned for a movie called Closing the Ring, which was directed by was it Richard Attenborough? And has Pete Postlethwaite in it, and it has the girl from The OC. And it's like a World War II movie. I did this terrible audition at Titanic Studios there, and they were like, "You're piloting a B-17, and, you see the mountain in front of you, and you go, 'Oh, I wish I was back home with Lady Liberty and, the Statue of Liberty.'" It was some bullshit, I don't know. So I didn't get it. Anyway, it was a small role, but whatever. So, um but The Fall is filmed there, and so it's filmed, like, all through the city. It's filmed at my university, and I recognize all the places. But what's cool about that is that, um, 3 of my friends from university, from when I was studying drama there, are all major stars in the show, which is really weird because we were all the same year. So shouts out to Claire Rafferty, and shouts out to Brona, and also to her husband, Jonathan, who are all big time. And Jonathan, actually, Jonathan Harden is his name, actually just did a short film. Um, he was in a film with Liam Neeson. And then our other friend named Lisa McGee went on to create the show Dairy Girls. And if you go on Netflix, Dairy Girls is a huge show. And she was my year at university, one of my friends, and she created that show. And now Liam Neeson's in it. So that's pretty cool. That's just a side note. Why was I talking about that? Where did I get onto that one? I don't know how I started talking about that. Okay, so in the next part, he goes, "My first 5 years," and this goes back to Canada. And of course, on page 13, he says, "So I pull out a vial of liquid morphine and sink my cigarette in it. The narcotic dries fast, adhering to the tobacco. I light up and inhale deeply, listening to the wondrous crackling as the fire hits my lungs and smoke hits my brain. Then the smoke clears, and in place where it was is now a picture." So oh, The Office, yeah. So I was talking about that because Norm has a bit about, um not a bit, but he's talking about why he likes the UK Office better, and he says basically that one thing is that in the original Office, Ricky Gervais is fun, like, he is funny, and he's so funny, and it would if you were an office worker there, it would be impossible not to laugh at his jokes because he's so funny. Whereas Michael in the new Office is a different kind of funny. He's more of a a different awkward kind of funny, but he's also more of a, like, a a kind of a comforting funny. It's more emotional. The UK Office is not emotional like that at all. And in fact, like, the UK Office is only 2 seasons and then the Christmas special, and then they came back to it later. But, um, there's a great poem that Ricky Gervais, uh, David reads in The Office, and it's called Excalibur, and I know the poem by heart. I can't really say it here, but he says, "Would you like to hear my poem? It's called Excalibur." Um, I can't say it here because it's a little too filthy, but, it's pretty brilliant. And also he's a musician in it, and he's like, free love on the free love highway. Okay, so one thing that Norm does throughout the book, like the tropes that he uses, which are pretty, brilliant, are, they kind of they serve as cliches in other works, but they're not really cliches in this because, what they do is, like, for instance, the whole morphine thing, and he takes it as kind of ridiculous. Now he's, like, conflating morphine with, like, PCP angel dust, that Big Dipper, right? Where he's dipping his sherm and he's gonna drift away on the Big Dipper, but it's morphine. But he uses that as a kind of almost a Burroughs-esque, um, vehicle for riding the haze into the past. He also does that with his, with his dirty work outfit. which is funny because, like, you know, the fact that anybody would recognize him from Dirty Work is really funny. Remember when he did that interview with Bob Saget, and they're like, "So what's the movie about?" And he's like, "I don't know, it's yeah, it's directed by Bob Saget, so, it can't be that good." Norm was great at non-self promotion. The other thing is the answering machine bit. Now, this was only funny to me, because I was my own audience, but I went to see Seinfeld with my friend Logan, back in, December, November or December. I went to see Jerry Seinfeld stand up, and, and that was he was funny, but he did, all Seinfeld bits, right? But, what he thanks, Andrew, appreciate you, homeboy. But what he did was, at the end of his stand-up act, he, he, uh, he kinda came back on stage and he said, "Alright, any requests or any questions? Anybody want me to talk about anything?" And I yelled as loud as I could, "Do the answering machine bit." And like, nobody would have understood that. Maybe if one of you guys were there, you would have laughed, but I thought it was so funny because Norm's answering machine bit is the fake joke that is a Seinfeld-esque joke, right? Because it's, like, so topical and nobody there is no answering machine bit. What's the deal with answering machines? Um, so let's see. See, on page 14, he says, "When I was young, I was in great shape. I was in peak physical condition when I was 1. Man, I look great. I even look good for my age. Strangers would always approach me smiling and they'd say, 'Look at you, little boy. What are you, 0?' 'Oh, no,' my mother would giggle. 'He's 1.' 'Well, I'll be dang. He doesn't look a day past 0.' 'Nope, he's 1.' She'd blush proudly. My mother did all the talking for me back then because I hadn't got the hang of it yet." He talks about his brother Neil, who went on to be a what? Did you know Norm's? I'm sure you guys know this, but um, Norm's brother was Neil Macdonald, and he was the White House correspondent for a Canadian news agency. Did you know that? Um, he says my favorite times were in the evening when my father would have company over. That's what we called it back then, company. And the old man would show up at the house and take a chair and a beer, and they'd cracker barrel the night away. And my father was old when I was born. He was 2 generations before me. Years before he met my young mother, he had served in the war. All our neighbors were my father's age, so I was always around old ones growing up, and that suited me just fine. There was Bill Delaney, who could fix anything needed fixing, and Tommy Jackson, the town barber. One time he had a hippie from Cornwall come in for a trim, but Tommy forced a proper haircut on him. There was Angus McGregor, and of course there was old Jack. And he goes on to tell this story about old Jack. And this is pretty this is pretty hard hitting because old Jack dies and old Jack like lives in their shed and he says that his dad forced him to go and see old Jack at the funeral home. And he was scared, he really didn't wanna go, and he didn't wanna see him, and then he walked in, and then he looked at old Jack, and then when he walked away, he says he was fine because that wasn't old Jack. That was just some fucking old man, that was some shell of a man that was there, right? Because Jack wasn't there anymore, he was in heaven. So good for him, good for Norm. Um, I love how Norm, talks about hanging out with old people because Norm does have, like, this the kind of old man sensibility, that comes with being able to tell a good story, and he's right about this, that, on the one hand, Norm says that, like, it's much more interesting talking to old people than young people, right? Which is true in a lot of ways. Um, hearing old people's stories, and listening to them talk, you get a lot from that. On the other hand, he talks about how, he met Matlock at that airport, and, he really wanted to talk to Matlock, he always liked Matlock, and he saw him at that airport bookstore, and he wanted to talk to him. So he grabbed a book and he walked up beside him, and he thought, how can I get to talk to Matlock? Well, he said, I like books. I like learning things. I like reading. I like Southern lawyers. I like, white suits. And the guy said, well, that's real nice. A young fella like you. It's good to see a young fella like being interested in books. And he talked to him before he realized, um, that wasn't Matlock. It wasn't Matlock at all. It was just some fucking old man. And there's not a day that goes by that he doesn't think of that old man, how much he hates his fucking guts. Um, yeah, and old Harold Delaney. Well, Harold Delaney, was the guy that Norm, played Scrabble with because, he went to a bed and breakfast, um, to get away from, showbiz, all the showbiz. So he went out to this bed and breakfast and he got there, they it's just a guy's house, right? And it was this old man, Harold Delaney. And, so, old Harold Delaney said, "Yeah, come on in," And then um, that night he was going to bed and he heard a knock on his door and, he realized, "Oh, no, here comes old Harold Delaney wanting to have sex with him." But he said, "Ah, you wanna play some Scrabble?" So he went downstairs and, he said, "Sure, I like playing Scrabble." So he played Scrabble with him and, you know, like Harold Delaney would take forever, right? And he every word that he got was like something around the room, like cat, right? Or boot. And he said, you can't, Harold, you can't put that there, because he was just putting words wherever on the board. And he said, "What? You never heard pray tell of a boot?" And Norm was getting words like, like slay, right? And he was getting all the big words. And anyway, so So finally, they played all night and then he slept and then he woke up in the morning and he went down. He was hungry because, he'd been playing Scrabble all night with Harold Delaney. So I went downstairs and he said, "Hey, you got any breakfast? Because it's a bed and breakfast." Right. And, and Harold Delaney said, "There's no breakfast." He said, "All right, well, I'm going to go to McDonald's." And he said, "Will you pick me up an egg McMuffin?" And yeah, it's also the guy that, you know, he, the guy went to move out to the country, right? And a guy, one of the neighbors came and said, "Hey, you want to come on over? We're gonna have a party." And he said, "Well, this is really nice. This is why I moved out to the country, right? Just for people like this, this little kind of like country home style, you know, uh, people are real nice out here. I like this." And the guy said, "Yeah, come on over. We're gonna have a get together. There's gonna be a little drinking, a little fighting, a little fornicating." And he said, "Well, what time should I show up?" And he said, "It don't matter. It's just the two of us." So, I'm sorry. I know I'm not doing I'm not doing justice to Norm jokes, but also I'm not going to be doing a Norm impression because he hated that. And also they always sound whack when people try to imitate him. Um, his voice, just like tell the joke. Anyway, yeah, so he tells a couple stories here. He says, oh, one thing that was interesting on page 22 tied in with remember when we read The Prestige? And he says, he wanted old Jack to tell him old Jack did like magic tricks. And he wanted him to show him how to do the magic tricks. And he said, and this is about old Jack. He says, and so when he was drafted into the war, they made him a sniper. He told me that he killed and killed for 4 years, and he said that kind of killing changes a man. He knew they never would have made him kill all those men if he had not learned to shoot so well as a boy. He said when he returned to Canada, he felt apart from other men and felt closer to little children who hadn't yet learned to hate. And I asked old Jack if he figured he could still shoot a squirrel's eye out at 40 feet. "Don't know," old Jack said. "I love squirrels now. I've even trained one. I feed him corn right from my hand, and he climbs onto my shoulder." Now that's gotta be kept a secret, Sprite, because if another man found that out, I'm afraid he would kill my squirrel and dry it on the porch till he was ready to eat. Um, and where's the old squirrel, old Jack? He lives in the tool shed with me, falls asleep right on my belly. I guess I'm the only fellow on this blessed earth who has a squirrel for a pet. Will you show him to me, old Jack? I can't do that, Sprite. He might get spooked and bite you. Maybe I'll just teach you a magic trick instead. So old Jack finally showed me how to produce a nickel from behind a boy's ear. And once I knew how it was done, once I knew the trick for what it really was, I became angry. I made old Jack promise that from now on he would only perform his magic tricks and never tell me the truth behind them. Now, that's pretty good because it's pretty cool because we covered that exact thing in the book, The Prestige. You remember we covered that? We covered the book and the film where um what's his name? Christian Bale's character, what's his name? Freddie, yeah, I can't remember his character's name. Anyway, he says that the magician, never he says it in the film, right? Never tell anyone the secret because once they learn the secret, they will hate you for it. Everybody wants to know the secret behind the magic trick, but once they find out, they won't have any respect for you and they'll hate you. And that's kind of what Norm says here that old Jack tells him. Um, Chapter 5 is the shortest chapter, 8 years old to 13 years old. I forget. That's it. Um, let's see. He goes on to talk about this bit is funny. Um, this is chapter 7, driving to Las Vegas, and they're listening to Billy Joe Shaver. The slam of the car door wakes me, and my dreams fall away as the facts of my life tumble back into my empty head. I'm alone in the car and look out to see that I'm at the edge of the desert, the godforsaken desert where the snakes go hungry and die eating dirt. It's a cowboy poet, isn't he? I see that Adam Eget is out there pacing around agitated, a cigarette stuck to his mouth like always. Like they must teach everyone to do at AA, and he's cursing the sky that has no stars. So I ask him what the problem is. This is where Kinnison died, Norm. Jesus, if that's true, Adam Eget took a detour off Highway 15. It's gonna set us back at least an hour. I get out of the Challenger with the intention of giving Adam Eget a good old fashioned beating, but then I realize this is sacred ground after all. I put one knee down in the hard sand, bow my head, and close my eyes. Sam, the last original voice in comedy, silenced forever when a drunk and a pickup hit him head on. After the crash, Sam got out of the car, walked around, talked to his best friend Carl LeBove, and then finally to God himself. He had heard something out there that Carl hadn't, and he seemed at peace with it as he lay down with his spirit, rose into the cold desert air. It's sacred ground, all right. You knew him, Norm. Adam Eget was kicking the hard sand as if the desert itself was to blame. I knew him, all right. When I first started out, he was real kind to me. Sam wasn't famous yet and couldn't get much work in the States. But Mark Breslin, the fellow who owned all the clubs in Canada and gave me my start, he wasn't like a regular club owner. He hired Sam when no one else would. And that's how I came to know Sam. Did he kill every night, Norm? No, the fact was he never killed at all. Mark Breslin had a bonus in Sam's contract that Sam would get an extra 1,000 every time he walked a room. But every single person had to leave. I saw Sam do it twice. Boy, those were crazy nights, Adam. He get crazy, beautiful days. Why didn't he kill? How do I know? Truth was, it was a mystery because he could shake a room to its foundations, and the folks knew that something was going on, but they get up and leave just the same. Maybe folks didn't want anything new. Maybe they just want to hear the things they already know. How the hell should I know? You see how profound this book is? It's so profound because Norm has, um, the greatest. He has a profound respect um, for the people in his craft, right? He understands why they're funny, but he also understands that the funny people, like, often, obviously, it's the sad clown. They often have the most pain. And Sam Kinison, I don't know if you guys know Sam Kinison, but Sam Kinison was big in the 80s. He was kind of like an MTV comic. And I remember the night Sam Kinison died because my friend Brad called me and said, "Did you hear?" And I was like, "No." I mean, I was like, I must have been 8 years old or something. And he called and he said, he said, "Sam Kinnison's dead." And we thought that he died of a cocaine overdose back then. But it was this. I guess it was this hit and run. And what's amazing about Norm's story is that, Sam Kinison was a truly irreverent comic, right? He was also he was remember he would played the professor, the kind of ex Phoenix program um uh college professor in Back to School with Rodney. And Kinnison was awesome. And I loved him because we loved him back then because we thought it was so cool how he screamed. And he Kinnison has this bit about Manson that you can look up that's really funny. He's like, "Manson, man, that guy's so fucking far out, man." He's like, he's like, "I don't know, man. They told me to do it. They told me to do it, man. You fucking nuts, man." His Kinnison's bit. And his screaming is so good. He's so good. But that Sam Kinison, um, was an ex-Pentecostal preacher, like a snake handler. And, Norm, makes clear to show that, the end of his life, he walks out in the desert and talks to God and dies. And then, of course, Norm has this great moment in the book where he genuflects. He gets down on one knee and prays, for Sam. So, he goes on to tell this bit about Sam Kinison. So he says, "He was a sight to see. The rest of us, we all dressed in suit jackets and shoes like our dads wore, but Sam's jacket was a long duster, and he always wore a bandana too. And when he talked, it was a wild shriek. There was a music in it. It put me in mind of a Pentecostal minister I'd once seen who hailed from West Texas and came up through the Ottawa Valley when I was a young boy, a man who handled snakes and talked unafraid. Sam put me in mind of him for a good reason, too. Turned out Sam used to be a preacher himself. Anyway, I was just starting out in comedy at the time, and Sam came through Ottawa and he took a liking to me. So he let me travel with him and open for him all across Canada. I bet you have good stories about it, Sam, don't you, Norm?" Oh, sure. I remember one time we were flying from Toronto to Winnipeg, Sam and I, and before we took off, the captain came over the intercom, as is the custom on airplanes. "Good morning," the captain said. "This is your captain, Pat Johnson. We will be flying." And Sam gave out a wild scream. "No, not Crash Johnson, not Crash Johnson." Well, it was about the funniest thing I'd ever heard. The idea that this captain had been in so many accidents that his nickname was Crash, that just busted me up, and I started laughing and couldn't stop. Of course, nobody else found it funny at all. It caused quite an alarm, and Sam got himself a good talking to by the girls that bring you the little drinks, but he didn't care. He had me laughing hard, which I guess was the only thing he was after. He apologized to the girls, giggling the whole time. You know that old Sam giggle. Um, so the next chapter, let's see, talks about here's where he talks about cults. This is a good bit. He says, "I was 21 in 1984 when Mark Breslin opened Yuck Yuck's Comedy Club in Ottawa. I was making 21.20 a day for Charlie, and Mark was offering $15 a set. A set took about 5 minutes, and you could do two a night if you were lucky. So the decision was pretty easy. And never once did Mark Breslin ask if I had boots. Mark owned branches of Yuck Yucks all across Canada, and Howie Wagman was and still is the manager of the Ottawa Club. Howie helped me with the ins and outs of comedy. I'll never forget my first line on a stand-up stage. 'How many of you guys own answering machines?' To this day, it remains one of my strongest lines. I quickly developed a cult following. That sounds pretty good, but the truth is that it's the last thing you want to develop. The only time having a cult following is a great thing uh, is when you're actually in a cult. Then you get to be a cult leader, and life is milk and honey. First off, he says, everyone thinks you're God, so you get to tell them what to do. Your followers bow down before you and give you all their worldly goods, which can really add up, even with a smallish cult. The best part is you get to lie down with all the ladies from the cults, even the married ones. In a short matter of time, you become drunk with power and begin to lie down with the men also, not because you want to, but just because you can. Yes, being a cult leader with a cult following is fine work if you can find it. However, being a stand-up comedian with a cult following just means that most folks hate your guts. Um, so so let's see, next chapter, chapter 9, he says, "My greatest gig," he says, Adam Eget says, "Tell me another story." So they're at this point in the book, they're riding off uh, to Vegas. And Norm would do this. He would actually. So what he would do is when if you notice, like when you watch some of the old SNLs, um, you know when the show's over and then they all come out and they do the curtain call, right, and they bow. Well, you notice in a lot of those episodes that Norm isn't there. And, that's because apparently Norm would insist on leaving before that so that he could get out of there, and he would take the company limo, and they would drop him off in Atlantic City, and then he would stay, and he would gamble straight through the weekend. And he's gonna talk about gambling. I mean, the book uses gambling as a kind of a vehicle in terms of the narrative, but he's interesting because Norm was a gambler, and and, uh and so what happened was he actually was very successful at it, and, he talks about how he counted cards and, like, counting cards isn't, that it's not a big deal in terms of professional gamblers, and Norm played in the professional poker tournaments in Vegas, not just the celebrity tournaments, but, um, remember, he also won he should have won the $1,000,000, and so Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, he had the right answer, but he took it because he didn't wanna gamble on the million, um, in case it was wrong, and he walked away with the 500,000, and that was a funny story because he says, "Why don't they let me keep the money? You gotta give it to charity." And so he gave his money to the Paul Newman charity, and then because of that, they offered him the chance to go and talk to Paul Newman, and then when he turned it down because he said, like, "What's he got?" Paul Newman was his hero, and what are you gonna get there and, like, what are you gonna talk to Paul Newman about? It was like when Norm talked to he when he, told the story about they asked, like, who's the most famous person that he ever met, and, he said, I don't know, probably Paul McCartney, and, he met him backstage at SNL, and they were like, "What'd you talk to Paul McCartney about?" And he was like, "I don't know. What am I gonna talk to him about?" I asked him, like, how "Had you seen the where's the sports book? Have you seen have you seen the sports have you seen the football game results?" And Paul McCartney was like, "I don't know." And he was like, "Okay." Like, had nothing in common with these people, which is pretty cool. Um, and yeah, so Norm, talked about counting cards and, like, how, poker players, great card players can count cards. My great uncle was a brilliant man who, was a great card player and actually, made his way through World War II because of his ability to play bridge and poker, and he was a great tennis player and was very successful in what he was doing because of that. But anyway, he could count cards. But the thing Norm says is that it doesn't really matter in terms of the big casinos because they're always cycling through the decks, so they just it doesn't really matter. But he said that the worst he heard this from a fellow gambler, and then he realized it was true later on that the worst day of his life was the first day that he won large at a casino because it put the hook in him like he was just talking about with, Adam Eget's, cocaine addiction. He said, it put the hook in him because the more you try and wriggle out, the deeper the hook sinks. And so you win large, and then you're always trying to, um, make up the feeling of winning the large bet, if that makes sense. Um, Artie Lang talked about this with Norm. He said that they would go to Vegas and, they would go to Vegas, and he says that one time Norm won, like, a ridiculous amount of money and that he took it, he cashed his chips. He took it all in cash, and he went out to the ocean, and he threw it in the ocean. And he said that most people would probably hear that and think, "What an idiot." But he said that, Norm's he understood what Norm was going through at the time because, he knew that that money would only cause him more pain. He would just keep gambling. He would just lose it all. And so he tried to his way of cold turkey was to throw the money in the water. And I think that's like a real I mean, that's like a real Dostoevskian moment in real life to me. That's, like, pretty hardcore. Um, yeah, exactly. Crack says, "I've always been lucky with gambling, I've never won," which is what Norm says. So, he talks in this part, this is good because he talks about the greatest gig that he ever played. He says, "A comedian never forgets his greatest gig, but the details slip away with time, and the devil's in the details, and so is God. And so I pick up a brand new Surette and fill it with grains and grains of morphine and puncture the flesh between my middle and my ring finger." It's such bullshit. I mean, maybe it's not. Maybe it's not bullshit, um, but it certainly works as a lyrical kind of vehicle in this in the like the dark narrative of the disturbed comedian, in the voice of this book. He says, um, "When the drug hits hard, the present is gone along with the white Challenger, but there's a red Datsun in its place. It's 1985, and I'm a young man who's done stand up for only a year, and I'm driving to a gig all by myself. The beautiful opioid allows me to see this all as it happened yesterday and not 10,000 yesterdays ago. I'd gotten a gig doing comedy at a hospital for the patients. It didn't pay me any money, but that's not what a comic does a gig like that. You take that gig, you type of gig just because you want to be a good person and receive eternal life. Son of a bitch, that drive was long. Why they built the hospital so damn far away from everybody, I couldn't figure. It was way out in the middle of northern Ontario where you have to pray your car doesn't break down. And if it does, you have to pray you freeze to death before the timber wolves find you. Well, the people who built it must have known what they're doing. After all, they owned a hospital, and I was just some guy in a car asking questions to myself. Suddenly, in the middle of nothing, where the infinite nothing of the sky meets the infinite nothing of the snow, I saw something. It was a small square blue sign, a sign indicating a hospital ahead. It may as well have read "Last chance for heart attack for 300 miles." I was getting close and getting nervous too. Maybe it was the barbed wire around the perimeter, or maybe it was just the armed guards. What kind of hospital was I playing anyway? I got my answer quick enough because it was written on a big sign: "Hospital for the criminally insane." My agent had never been big on details. It took me a while just to get into the place. First, they patted me down and took all my weapons and my drugs. And they looked up my ass and took those weapons and those drugs as well. Finally, they let me go from the outside to the inside. "Take me to the warden," I demanded. "This is a hospital, son. There's no warden." "Fine. And take me to the entertainment director." We walked down a long corridor filled with howls of anguish and high wailing screeches. Every cage I passed had a guy in it, and every guy was acting odder than the last. The first guy was scratching his hair real hard, even though it was shorn close, like he was trying to scratch inside his head or something. And he just kept saying, "I was John D. Rockefeller funeral." Then the next guy was just staring at me, stone still, and he had a big smile on his lips, but his eyes were cold dead. I started laughing to beat hell. "How do you work with these characters all day and not crack up?" asked the orderly. "Oh, you get used to it." "What about the guy with the cold, dead eyes standing there?" I asked. "What did he do to get in there?" "Oh, his name's Fred Henshaw. He took his mother out to the cold northern tundra when the sun never sets and cut off her eyelids." That way that way she could sleep or even shield her eyes from the sun. Then Fred had her wander around, tripping in the snow, falling, getting back up, falling again. Every day, Fred would take a hypodermic needle and remove half a pint of blood from the old lady. After about a week, his mother just lay down on the hard snow. Then he sat down and waited for the crows to come. Oh my god, that's the worst thing I've ever heard. What about the guy before him, Mr. Itchy Head? What did he do? Oh, him? Trust me, you don't wanna know. These character shenanigans became less amusing after I heard their backstories. I was starting to get real nervous about the show, thinking that maybe these guys wouldn't be able to relate to my material. How could they be expected to understand the difference between cats and dogs, or the difference between Los Angeles and New York, if they didn't understand the difference between right and wrong? I was shown into a room where I met the entertainment director. "Listen, pal, I want to do good and all, but I think this is a big mistake. When I heard this was a hospital, I imagined sick people, really sick people, the kind you want nothing to do with. Some of these fellows look healthier than you and me." Oh, don't worry, you'll do fine. We had the Gatlin brothers last week. The Gatlin brothers. I couldn't believe my ears. But then the guy showed me the room, and it was world class with steep stadium seating and perfect acoustics. I'd only seen such a fancy venue out at one time, and that was for a crowd made up of folks who never slaughtered a single man. It was like a broken calculator. It just didn't add up. How is it these monsters deserve such a fancy venue? Well, let me explain something, Norm. You see, technically, all these fellows are not guilty. Not guilty by reason of insanity. Do you understand? No. Every one of these men has been found guilty in the eyes of the law. Oh, well, that shed a different light on not guilty. Well, that shed a different light on the situation. If these guys weren't guilty of anything, then they deserve the best show I could give them. I guess I always kind of knew that deep down, but it took the entertainment director to make me realize it. The entertainment director at the hospital for the criminally insane. Okay. Soon, showtime arrived, and I stood in the wings, peering through the curtains. The room was made to hold about 500, but I could see there were only roughly 7 people assembled. But where is everybody? The entertainment director shook his head. I can't figure it. There's not a single other form of diversion in this entire hospital for the criminally insane. And then he looked at me mean, like it was my fault. It's not my fault, I said. When we had the Gatlin brothers last week, we had to turn people away, criminally insane people. It broke my heart. Well, get out there. You're on. And he pushed me toward the stage really hard. I hit the stage to silence. Good evening, folks. How many of you here own an answering machine? None of us. That's how many, answered one, and the other 6 grumbled in dissent. You got any complaints? Tuesday morning's meeting's the time to bring them up, Kowalski. You know that. Now pipe down and let the man speak, said a guard. Anyhow, I continued. I got one, and they're more trouble than they're worth in many ways. Now, say a man phones you, and I just couldn't go on. One of the criminally insane men had found his way onto the stage and had begun biting my leg hard. And the guard had begun striking him with the business end of a baton. But that just caused the criminally insane man to dig his teeth in deeper. He started shrieking, and the audience got a big kick out of that. So the other patients began to wander into the auditorium to see what the commotion was. And by the time they finally shed my leg of the criminally insane man's teeth, the place was full with everybody clapping and cheering and biting. It was the greatest show I ever had. Okay. So, let's see. He goes on to talk about Star Search with Ed McMahon. He says he was in international Star Search um, because he was Canadian, right? I was backstage with my agent and a bunch of dirty foreigners, he says. I was one of them, but only technically because I was from Canada. In Canada, everything we watch on TV and buy in stores is American, and we also speak the same language. I never felt like I was in a different country when I was in the United States. My opponent's name was Bushman. So Norm gets like uh panic attack, and downs a bunch of Xanax, and then he goes out and tells his jokes. His jokes don't laugh, but the Bushman goes out and kills it. And so Norm doesn't get his job. Ed McMahon hates him. Um, then let's see, he says, um, oh, on page 48, it's interesting because it turns into kind of a Hubert Selby Jr. um last exit to Brooklyn kind of drugstore cowboy. He obviously you can tell you can tell what Norm was reading when he wrote this, or at least where he took his inspiration from, says Adam Eget. Because on page 48, he says, um, "Sure, Norm, those are smart fellows from Harvard who punch up screenplays to make the thing funnier. I laugh at the innocents. You've been living in Hollywood too long. The real script doctors sell magic, not cheap at all. There's a drug named Dilaudid. It costs $10,000. A small dose proves lethal. I have a friend in Vegas named Gabe who knows a script doctor who can provide me with this drug. If I lose, I simply put in my blood, say my prayers, lay down, and die in my free bed." So he goes on to talk about his ghostwriter, and the bit about Dilaudid was a nod pun to drugstore cowboy. Now, the ghostwriter, the so-called ghostwriter that Norm has for this book, he says he starts to write in this section, and he says, "My name's Keen. I'm a ghostwriter. Nothing you've read in this book has been written by Mr. Macdonald. That is my job to write these sorts of books for these sorts of people. But this one I was excited about. I was a very, very big fan of Norm Macdonald, was. Now, um, the the bit this is another bit because the ghostwriter's real name is Charles Manson, and, he's not that Charles Manson, but there's a whole chapter about how he gets famous because he gets a book deal in the '60s talking about the shenanigans of a group of people that he's hanging out with, and it just so happens that this happens at the same time as these, awful things happen, the other thing that happened. Um, and so the guy then loses his book deal, and now he has to be um, he has to be a ghostwriter for people like Norm Macdonald under an assumed name. Um, there's a bit about, let's see, page 101, there's a bit about the beats. Um, he says, and this is actually the bit that Norm's writing in the so Norm is ghostwriting the ghostwriter here, and the ghostwriter himself is ghostwriting himself. So Norm's writing a ghostwriter writing a ghostwrite of a ghostwrite, right? It's very meta. And Norm was prescient in terms of the meta comedy, because he remember he brought up meta jokes. It's a meta joke, it's meta, right? And the other comedians were like, "I don't get that." And he's like, "It's like anti-comedy." And you could tell that Norm probably watched he probably knew Sam Hyde was. Um, but this is like this is like 15 years ago that he was doing this, right? And anyway, so I've yet to get to the part where we're gonna dissect like what makes the perfect joke for Norm. But this part he's ghostwriting and he says, I was not always a ghost. As with all ghosts, I was once a living, breathing man. I lived in the city by the bay, and in a coffee house, I sat at the feet of the masters and listened. There was Neil Cassidy and Kerouac too, and Ginsberg who howled at the moon, which is a great it's a great way of Norm has such a great way of summarizing the spirit of some of these writers because, of course, Ginsberg's poem is called Howl, right? But he tells it like he's telling an old-timey cowboy story from another era, right? And he says, they were the young lions of beat, but their time was growing short when I arrived in the city. So, of course, because Howl was first, performed, in San Francisco. Was it in San Francisco? It was in San Francisco where Jack Kerouac was handing out the Tokay wine. He had big jugs of wine, and he was handing out wine, during the performance. Gary Snyder was there. That's of course in the Dharma Bums, which we covered. Jaffe Ryder, Gary Snyder. Remember I met Gary Snyder, and Gary Snyder is like one of the it's kind of offshoots of the beat generation because he's a pretty cool guy. I mean, he's a and normal in the sense that he was an academic and he was athletic, and he went off to be a Zen monk in Japan for 10 years. But I met him in DC. I went to a reading with my friend Paul, and he it was at the Folger Shakespeare library in a huge hall. And you know, I know talking about poetry readings and all that, but I've been to quite a few of them, and that one was it was one of the best things I've ever seen in my life because first of all, it was packed. I was in the second row, and it was packed. I mean, there were probably 1,000 plus people. There were people all along the walls, all the way in the back, spilling out in the streets. And he's just this like regular looking old dude, and he was reading his poems from like his. He won the Pulitzer Prize for his book Turtle Island, and anyway, he read this poem called Magpie Song, and it was one of the most beautiful, one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen, and it wasn't just me because after he finished this one poem, um, like, I turned around and looked at my friend, and my friend was like, everybody in the place was stunned. It's a very short poem. Everybody was stunned, and, the whole place erupted in applause. It was really it was amazing because he sang it, and it was brilliant. Anyway, afterwards, I met him at the reception, where everybody was drinking wine and all that stuff. So he says, and so I shadowed them everywhere and asked them everything, and their answers were the greatest education a young writer could hope to receive. Burroughs, we just covered Burroughs. Burroughs, Kerouac, Ginsberg were my main subjects. And he goes on to talk. He says, "You see, my name was not Terence Keane at the time, but oh, how I wish that this had been my real name back then, because when my work hit the bookshelves in late November of 1969, it contained the cursed name I was given at birth, a name unknown when the book was published, but widely known only days later. I will never forget the elation I felt when, early on the morning of November 29th, I looked through the window of Rizzoli's on 57th Street and saw dozens of copies of my book on prominent display. There it was, My Beautiful Family by Charles Manson." So, um, he goes on in the next chapter to talk about how he beat the devil in a deal, um, where the devil tries to get him to sell his soul, and Norm beats the devil back. Um, there's a I don't know why, but I pasted when I first read this, I don't know what I thought of, but I this pasted this Emily Dickinson poem in here because it I think because it ties in with this chapter. I'm not an Emily Dickinson fan, but I do like this poem. Wild nights, were I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury. Futile the winds to a heart in port, done with the compass, done with the chart. Rowing in Eden, ah, the sea, might I moor tonight in thee. And then it goes on. It's a great my favorite part of the book is on page 112. I sent this to the real John Connor out there. It says, "I try to get up, but I'm not used to all the extra weight and my knees buckle. I crawl to the candy and empty a pack of Junior Mints in my mouth, then begin to unwrap a Butterfinger. Why am I eating like this, Gabe? What's going on?" "I've been thinking on that," said Gabe. "Did you ever see the movie Milk?" "I love milk," said Adam Eget. "Right. But you mean you love to drink it out of a glass or maybe put it on your cereal?" "Oh, yeah," says Adam Eget. "Well, this movie, Milk, has nothing to do with that." That movie sucks. You guys seen that movie? Alright, Sean Penn. Um, then he goes on to talk about psychiatrists and how he met with a psychiatrist, and he says, "I remember a psychiatrist." Norm says he saw a psychiatrist one time, and he said, um "Adam Eget and I take the last 70,000 over to the craps table. I bet 5,000 on every number, so I have $30,000 on the table. I know as I do it, I'm out of control, but I cannot stop. Gabe was right. I'm still on tilt. My only hope now is to hit a run of good luck. Hitting a run of good luck at the exact time you are on tilt can make you a fortune fast. But instead, I watch as my bankroll goes up and down, then up again, and then I think how this will likely be the last time I place money on a game of chance. I remember a psychiatrist once telling me that I gamble in order to escape the reality of life. And I told him that's why everyone does everything. That's true. That was the one time Norm went to the psychiatrist and they tried to hit him with this profound thought, right? The reason you gamble is because you're trying to escape life. You know, you need an escape from life. And Norm's like, isn't that why everyone does everything to try and stave off boredom? Right. Um, He says, "A magic moment that occurred after the placing of a bet and before the result of that bet. It is after the red dice are thrown, but before they lie still on the green felt where they fall. It's when the dice are in the air, and as long as they are there, time stops. As long as the red dice are in the air, the gambler has hope, and hope is a wonderful thing to be addicted to." It's almost it's almost as powerful a thing to be addicted to as work, right? Because Norm was terribly addicted to the powerful drug of workahol early in his career. He says, "I sit on the edge of my bed and open the drawer. I take out the 600 milligrams of Dilaudid, the fresh Surette, and the Gideon's Bible. I read a few of my favorite scripture passages and I prepare the Surettes. And then I inject myself with the lethal dose of Dilaudid. I fall to my knees and rest my elbows on the bed. pray forgiveness for what I'm doing, and then I feel joy and peace fill my soul as my consciousness quietly drifts away, and then I don't die. And he goes on to talk about Make a Wish, um, and the answering machine sketch. Um, the Make a Wish story is interesting because it's one of Norm's long stories, kind of like the leper story or um the moth story, right? The moth story is great because, it's an old joke, and Norm consciously it's like he's stealing jokes, but he does that, as an homage to the great comics, right? And the the moth story, which he did that on Conan. Also, the one that he tells in this is the Make-A-Wish story. It's basically like he goes and he meets a kid in a hospital, who's got a terminal disease, and the kid, says, he offers him one wish, "We're gonna fulfill one wish," and the kid says that his one wish is to go and slaughter a baby seal. Um, and so Norm's Norm's story is and his oh, yeah, and his dirty Johnny joke. And but it's interesting in this because he uses Norm is great at language because he uses the same language that we've seen in, like, the last 10 streams of ours. It started with, like, the, American Psycho. I think that's where the first time we came across this language, and we recently found it in the Prince Harry autobiography, right, where he talks about the red mist, and he says, like, the thin skull exploded and a spray of blood fell around and upon the boy. Um And he talks about how he, he took this boy to do this his Make-A-Wish, which is this murderous act, and then the boy, like, mysteriously got well, and his the thing worked, I guess. And then he's hit by a car walking across, Fifth Avenue. Um, and and so, which is kind of I guess, a typical anti joke from Norm. He talks about, um let's see, on page 140 and 141, um, he says, let's see, "If you cry, sir, then cry with envy and not pity, for the boy is in the clouds, and he's one of the clouds. It is we who are left who are reminded on this unacceptable day that life is swift, and yet we're blind to its mighty splendor, which can be found in the simplest of things. Things like a walk in the park, a conversation with a good friend, a deep, rich coffee, leavened with half cream and half milk, and served in a sturdy mug, one with some heft, and with it a delicious cookie that's white and has red jelly in the middle. Thank you for listening, and due to the solemnity of the occasion, I would ask you to hold your applause because he's speaking at the funeral. This is real stream of consciousness. Oh, you mean like it's called conversation, right? Um, from there, we all went to the graveyard. The day was bright and clean, and the cool autumn air filled my lungs. It made me feel healthy. A time passed, and then the hearse showed up. The pallbearers were all big men, and they carried the tiny white coffin as if it was very heavy, although it could not have weighed more than 80 or 90 pounds. There was a small hole in the ground and some dirt beside it. We stood in a circle, and the sad-faced pastor said some things in Latin, and then we formed a line. The sun was directly overhead and made the tiny white coffin ever so bright, and I took a handful of dirt and flung it down on top. Then it was the next guy's turn. Afterward, I walked back alone down a long blacktop road, and it was cold, and in the sky, there were white clouds, and they all looked like white clouds and nothing else. Now, that's that passage is really that's like, Wallace Stevens, um, that's like his poem, The Snowman, or like Gertrude Stein, "A rose is a rose is a rose," or it's actually almost Blythe Spirit, Percy Shelley imagery there. The next scene, he goes into the wilderness, and we see this as, like, kind of the hero's journey into the wilderness. Um, and we also discover that when Norm gets back, he kind of finds his purpose, and then he starts talking about SNL. And so what he says here is that he's talking about jokes, and he says, jokes shouldn't, and this is brilliant because this is like really what comedy is, and it's coming from Norm. Jokes should never elicit applause. Um, a joke should catch people by surprise It should never pander. Applause is voluntary, but laughter is involuntary. And he says that the purest joke is one where the punchline and the setup are as they are the same. So it's like there's very little difference between the setup and the punchline. They are almost identical. And a great example of this is where is his joke from SNL, right? He says, Lyle Lovett and Julia Roberts are getting divorced. Insiders say the trouble began because he was Lyle Lovett and she was Julia Roberts. Now that's it's the same. It's the same thing. The payoff is the same as the setup. Um, he also coined the term fake news, right? And he learns about non sequiturs and comedy. So the next part I'm going to read because this is in the book. This is the top 25 weekend update jokes of all time in no particular order. So I'm going to take you through that. Before I do that, everybody, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you just tagging along with me and humoring me as I go through this Norm Macdonald book based on a true story. I recommend this. I mean, look, I think I've found in my own life that, you know, people either like get Norm or they really don't. And to me, it's always amazing when like I meet somebody, especially in real life, who like makes a just any kind of reference. You know, when you're hanging out with the fellas and somebody, quotes the movie Heat or something like that, and you have an instant kinship. Well, it's like that, especially with comedy, with comedians. Um, and so, um, th- I think that like it's let's see. Comendador says, "Sorry I missed most of the stream. Have you listened to the audiobook? Norm narrates it, and it's spectacular, as you can imagine." Um, no, I haven't listened to the audiobook, but that's because um, I've avoided that. I don't want to listen to the audiobook of this in Norm's voice because I feel like I've already internalized his voice, and because, like I said this at the beginning. Reading this book is actually kind of painful for me, painful in the best way. Because it hits on a number of things that like are have impacted me in my own life, so it's pretty hard for me to get through. Usually, I can just barrel right through a book, but this one I find pretty difficult. And I've seen everything Norm has ever done. Like any fan of his, like he said, he tends to have like a cult following, which mostly means that most people hate his guts, which is probably true. They either don't get it or they just don't think it's funny, and that's fine. Kind of like how I think that "You So Crazy" is the greatest stand-up act of all time. It's it's amazing, but I don't think I've ever met anybody else in my life who has ever even watched that or thought it was funny. So sometimes, like, they can be, comedy like that can be special, and comedy is also important because it's like it works like a salve, right, for your soul. I mean, laughter is, God gives us laughter. My thoughts on the Zoom special, you know yeah, I watched it, and, like, it's really I'm not trying to bring down anybody, but, like, that is really it was really difficult for me to watch. I honestly, like, I wept most of it. I really thought it was I just thought it was very painful, and I know that that defeats the purpose because he's telling jokes, and it is funny. But it is funny in a way where I see a person, trying to trying to make me laugh, um, in, like, their deepest pain, and I think that that's pretty hard. Um, and, okay, so if you wanna support me, please, I don't know if anybody's tried out the Dono Chat. I got the Dono Chat links, um, and No, no. That happened later, the Martin Lawrence bit, and that happened, I think, before his 2nd special, Run Tell Dat. Run Tell Dat is pretty funny because it's like Big 9 era humor, and he talks about how he's on the plane and he's looking around, he's like, "Osama bin Laden." Um, and I saw that well, anyway, I saw that a long time ago, but You So Crazy is when he's in the, in the all black leather jumpsuit getup, and he's got, like, the big peace sign, and he's like, "Yeah!" That's how it starts off. Anyway, you gotta watch it, but if you wanna support me, if anybody wants to click the Dono Chat link in there, because that is our new one of our new, payment platforms where, um, you know, the as you know, the old YT takes like 30% and takes a long time to get to us. So our homeboy BPF and Rachel over there have set us up with the Dono chat, and like I want to see if it works. I don't know if I've got it working right, but if you donate to it, then it will work. I just don't know if I'm going to be able to if I'll be able to see it. If you want to hit the Dono chat, you can leave a that's what BPF and them use, over at the Crucible, and you can drop messages, you can ask me questions just like you do in Super Chats. You can click Super Chats if you want, or you can get, your support to me directly through PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, etcetera. Imma give big shouts out to the people who supported me in the last since last time because a lot of people have reached out to me, and I appreciate that. Let me take a second. I gotta get some more cigarettes and I gotta open up a new drink. Okay, so I'll be right back. Give me 1 second. Y'all. Told you I'd be fast. Just had to run to the fridge store right there. Mhm. I think Cotezie been streaming tonight too, same time. So shouts out to Church of the Eternal Logos. And while I'm at it, let me get this stack of books right here. I mentioned a couple streams back. I was talking about that sculpture that I saw at the Guggenheim in New York. And it was the one made of the jackdaws and the, like balls of vermin where it cast a shadow on the wall and it made like a Medusa, 2 heads on a pike. And I was trying to remember the name of that sculpture by Tim Noble and Sue Webster. And I finally remember it's called Kiss of Death. And I found the poem that I wrote. I know that doesn't sound like an interesting setup for a story, but I found the poem that I wrote about that. And so one of these days I'm gonna read that on here because it's so sexual and violent. Um, but anyway, so the books that I have coming up to read for the stream to analyze, this one's a little different. I realize because I'm reading large chunks of the book and kind of telling stories. Usually we would go into a kind of a deeper analysis of the work and discuss, and discuss the form, the content, and the meaning, etc. Talking about it, and this one obviously is a little different. But we're gonna get back into doing that next. I think the next book that we'll read will probably be. We have to do. I know that who is it that sponsored? I think it's John sponsored the Wes Anderson stream, and I've been kind of having some trouble with how I'm gonna approach that. But we're gonna be doing that soon. Um, we also have the Canonical we got a Mechanical stream coming up, Joseph Conrad, bunch of sponsored streams. I'm gonna be doing Titus Andronicus. We're gonna get back into Shakespeare, violent Shakespeare. Paul Thoreau's Mosquito Coast for Mr. Baginski. We've got The Keep by F. Paul Wilson, which is about Nazis and in World War II and a demonic being. And we've also got Thomas Harris's Kyrie Mora, which is another serial killer book based on Silence of the Lambs. I've also got down in here, I've got an article on Huxley that I got to cover. We're going to be doing the Iliad sometime soon. Um, Picked up an old copy of My Brother Sam is Dead. Remember that book from when we were young? Got to read. I got to get a copy of The Shards um, by Bret Easton Ellis. We're also going to do The Crossing um, by Cormac McCarthy. But I gotta afford a copy of The Shards. So if you want me to get that, please think about um, supporting me. And let's see. Oh, sweet. Amptown says she sent me a dono chat to see if it worked. Okay. So let me see if I can pull this up. Because let's see. Yes, dono.chat. Okay. Hold on one second, you guys. Uh, It should work. Sweet. Sweet. It did work. Yes. Camptown 1 sends 3.99 and says, "Did it work? Thanks for the stream, BLA." Yes, thank you so much. And DJ sent in 10 bucks. Thank you, Dayjire, and says, "Hey, thanks. This has been great. Really appreciate that." Thanks, y'all. Really appreciate you testing out the dono chat there. That's really cool. Shouts out to our homeboy Rollin out there who says your light is on. Um, you guys remember Rollin? Rollin was here with me for the Apocalypse Now stream, which was one of my favorite ones that we've done, and hopefully we can do another one with my homeboy there. All right, so yeah, he's Rollin is giving us the punchline for the moth joke. So so now I'm going to take you through what Norm includes here, which is the top 25 weekend update jokes of all time. And again, like thank you, Jerry. Yes. Thanks, Jerry, for being here, especially. Thank you to Kristen and to Jethro out there. I'm gonna just take you through these, and I'm not gonna like bother doing a Norm impression because I think that's lame. I'm just gonna read we read jokes. We read jokes. So says um at the White House this week, this is topical and of the time. Uh at the White House this week, President Clinton officially came out against same-sex marriages. What's more, the president said he's not too crazy about opposite sex marriages either. Snorted. Shouts out to Rachel Bezos. Um, okay, this this is a good one. Um, Listen, any of you guys were any of y'all alive at the time? You might remember this one. This is a Jack Kevorkian joke. Dr. Jack Kevorkian was responsible for another death this week. This time, it was a 58-year-old woman, the 26th of Kevorkian's patients to die since 1990. When are people going to realize this man is not a good doctor? Okay. Um, the richest girl in the world, billionaire Athena Onassis, celebrated her 10th birthday this week. What's it like to be the richest girl in the world? Well, to give you some idea, at the party, they had two cakes. We just read the Julia Roberts one. Oh, here's a Gil Bates joke. Well, the results are in. And once again, Microsoft CEO Bill Gates is the richest man in America. Gates says he's grateful for his huge financial success, but it still makes him sad when he looks around and sees other people with any money whatsoever. Mhm. Um, okay. This one goes out to DJ. This week in the O.J. Simpson trial, Johnny Cochran delivered a spellbinding final summation. In a brilliant move, Cochran put on the knit cap prosecutors say Simpson wore the night of the double murders. Although O.J. may have hurt his case when he suddenly blurted out, "Hey, hey, careful with that. That's my lucky stabbing hat." Um, in music news, This is like Norm's perfect joke right here. In music news, number 1 on the college charts this week was Better Than Ezra. At number 2, Ezra. Um, in Walnut Creek, California, anyone who turns in his gun can now get free therapy, and anyone who does not turn in his gun can get free anything. I can't even read the Brando jokes because it's too spicy. But suffice it to say, it is, a also now a Kanye joke, okay? Um, yeah, Norm yes, Norm went hard on OJ, um, and, of course, that was the reason that he was canned from SNL because the president of NBC was best friends with OJ. Orenthal James Simpson, the greatest running back in the history of the NFL, um, as they say, in Family Guy. Greatest running back in the history of the NFL, um, 2 murders, no convictions, Orenthal James Simpson. So so, he, yeah, he did not like what's the guy's name? The president of NBC, the guy that fired Norm. Um, it's not important. Anyway, he fired him, and, remember, Dave Letterman said, "No, the guy's a jackass," and he said, "No, he's a nice fella, you know." And apparently, he called me up there and he said, "We're firing you," and he said, "Oh, well, that's not good." And he said, "Well, why are you firing me?" And he said, "Well, we just don't think you're funny." And Norm said, "Well, that's definitely not good because, I'm a comedian." And then, of course, later he went back on SNL and they had him back as the host, and he said, um, "It's not that I've gotten funnier, it's just that the show, has gotten worse. The show really sucks. So, I'm gonna stand up here and do a few jokes, and then, well, you'll see." Right. And Norm said Don Ohlmeyer, thank you, sir. Yeah, thank you, Goose. Norm said that his idea for when he hosted SNL, and this would have probably been brilliant, but he never would have worked again, was that he was just gonna get up and he was gonna do the opening monologue, and then he was gonna leave. He was just gonna leave the studio, and because it's live, and he was just gonna leave and go to, Atlantic City. And he said that would have been the perfect kind of book. It would have been the perfect comedic moment because who cares about the skits, right? The skits are all gonna suck. It was the monologue for him that was important. That was funny. I mean, and the monologue is really hit or miss. Like there are very few SNL monologues that have ever. I mean, like Dave Chappelle's monologue recently, was probably more in the spirit of what a SNL monologue should be. But like I said, that Louis C.K. monologue was like really good. But he said that a lot of times when they get the stars to do it, they're just terrible. In fact, um, he said the worst people that ever hosted SNL were Jason Patrick, who had just starred in Speed 2. Jason Patrick was one of the celebrities that I saw on the street when I lived in New York. He was outside of like Barney's or something. I was walking to work and I saw him and I said, "Hey, Jason Patrick, you're Jason Patrick." And he said, "Yeah, thanks, man." Like, no, I wasn't complimenting you. I was just saying you're Jason Patrick. Um, and Dennis Farina did that too, but Dennis Farina's cool. And the other was Steven Seagal. He said Steven Seagal was like trying to fight people backstage, but Steven Seagal gets a pass because we're about to do a Steven Seagal analysis of his films Marked for Death, Under Siege, Nico, or Above the Law, Hard to Kill, and what's the other one? Out for Justice, which are 5 of the greatest films of all time. Not to mention, we're gonna leave one of his greatest films, ODG. Rollin knows that one, On Deadly Ground. We're gonna leave that one for a different time, even though it does have the great scene about, it's kind of a it that one's kind of prescient because it's about eco tour, right? And he like, meets his spirit animal and the shaman in the wilderness, in true Seagal fashion. Hmm. But anyway, so let's get back to these Norm jokes. He says, let's see, this one's a real I mean, Norm's funny because he's like the Generation X comic, which is funny because like, he's really a boomer. I mean, he's 1959, right? But he really is the spirit of Norm Macdonald, like how he delivered jokes, what he was on Saturday Night Live is more Gen X than anything else I can think of. And that's kind of it's weird because I just started reading the next actually, probably the next analysis we'll do will be will that I'll do will be Alex Garland's The Beach. And even at in the intro to the book, it says this is the first X generation. They didn't even call it Generation X. This is the first X generation novel, which is interesting because Alex Garland was born in 1974, same year as my cousin and as AJ, Papa Ewok. And now Alex Garland has gone on to be the kind of transhumanist, ex machina slash men. And what's the other one? What's the other one with Natalie Portman? The one that Jay covered. Anyway, kind of transhumanist filmmaker. Also, he did Devs, which is a show that I think is a great show. It's a 10 episode show with Nick Offerman on Hulu. You should watch that, Devs. But again, it's just it's black cubes, transhumanism, all that stuff. But yeah, we're gonna be doing The Beach, but Norm really is the annihilation. Thank you. What? Um, and so this is a kind of a boomer joke here. Yes, thank you, Jeff. Um, he says, "Yippee! Jerry Rubin is dead." I'm sorry. That should read, "Yippee! Jerry Rubin is dead." My apologies. Now, now you will get that if you have any sort of knowledge about boomer events and politics. Who Jerry Rubin was and the Yippies. Mhm. Um, Next joke, he says, former First Lady Nancy Reagan reports that her husband has been relaxing at their ranch, riding horses and chopping wood. Sadly, eyewitnesses report that he was actually riding wood and chopping horses. Um, It was well, this is good because it's about serial killer, Richard Speck. It was revealed this week that mass murderer Richard Speck, while serving a lifetime sentence in prison, was videotaped with hormone-induced breasts, snorting cocaine, and having sex with a man. The film was apparently made with prison video equipment and a $300,000 grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. It's so true. Yes, channel is growing. We really are growing. We are at I guess about 1,800 subs now, trying to get up to 2,000. So thank you for everybody who keeps, all the subscribers out there. Please help me to keep growing up to 2,000. This is our 1 year anniversary night right now. This time 1 year ago, I was on here with like three of y'all, um, doing a audio only analysis of Macbeth because I couldn't even get the video to work and I couldn't even hook it up through YouTube. I didn't have any of the links yet. And I had like I had like Rachel and of course Jethro and Jerry here. And and then we just kind of built it up from there. And I mean, again, big shouts out to Jay because Jay shared out that the next night when I did it was the next night or 2 nights later when I got the video working and finally did a video, a full, uh, on video analysis of Macbeth, and Jay shared that out, and that is what really got the channel jump started. And then we kept going. He shared a couple more streams, then we were on there with Tristan, and, that was huge, and then, we've been on there with our homeboy, Church of the Eternal Logos. Also, I was on with Jerry early on and with Rachel, and so they really, have helped me out. So many of y'all have been so good to me, and, this is funny because, you know, like, the thing about Jay's channel is that I mean, Jethro and I especially know this, is that like watching for so many years, even before live streaming even existed, and then live streams became a thing, and then I would just look at the chats. So I was like lurking, and I would see Nate in there and Jethro and OK and then finally like when Karanka started, I finally got into the chats, and then that, with an audience like that, it allows people to make friends. Like it's weird how unintended it is that like you make friends with people that that you never seen before in real life. That's the world we live in, and of course I've met my homeboy Jethro in real life. Um, but you know, it's cool that it allows that sort of connections like that. So hopefully we can keep growing and building and that will happen. Yeah, Crack Wheeler says Shakespeare brought me here. Um, Macbeth movie with Fassbender was pretty good. Yes, thank you, Crack Willow. And yeah, that Macbeth version with Fassbender is interesting because they really take the interpretation that I read into, which is not original. I mean, other people have this reading into Macbeth, which is that Lady Macbeth is kind of serves as a Hecate figure. She's one of the witches, and that's because of her. I would, but um, pluck uh, pluck his gum. What is it? She would pluck her nipple from his boneless gums and dash the brains out. Right, he gives her speech, "Fill me from the toe, top full with direst cruelty." So she gives an invocation as he enters the castle, as Duncan enters the castle, right? The fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. And like we read into this the language of the fact that she is witch like. And yet she's the one who experiences the pangs of conscience, right? Out damn spot. And Macbeth loses his conscience. He goes into a sort of a complete megalomania. So the roles reverse. And the Fassbender version kind of took that and and ran with it. What I didn't like about that film was that it was too deliberately interpretational and artistic in terms of the long periods of slow motion and like and non-verbal cues. It's all like we're watching a slow art piece on screen. I get that. I get why they're doing that, but it doesn't really work because the reason that the story works is because of Shakespeare's language. Um, let's see. Next one is okay. Dr. James Watts, a neurosurgeon who performed the first frontal lobotomy, died this week in Washington. If you recall, a lobotomy involves drilling holes in the skull and then inserting and rotating a knife to destroy brain cells. What a genius. He'll be missed. um, Officials in Disney World have ordered the ride, the extraterrestrial, to be shut down so they can make it even scarier. When the attraction reopens in 2 weeks, it will be exactly the same, but missing one bolt. That one is funny to me um, because it reminds me of a story that my cousin broke. He told me a story when I was younger about um there was a ride called the Big Bad Wolf at Busch Gardens. Busch Gardens is a theme park here in Virginia, and Busch Gardens is cool. It's not as cool as King's Dominion, or as they called it in the '90s, PKD, Paramount's King's Dominion. Um, it was actually started and owned by the dad of this guy in my school. This guy I was friends with at my school. He started the theme park, and then he sold it to Paramount for Paramount's King's Dominion. That's when they changed all the rides to have movie themes. So they had this ride called the Hurler after Wayne's World, and that was so cool at the time because it was like 1994, and you could go to the gift shop. I bought a Rancid T-shirt at the gift shop. It said "Give them the boot." I thought that was so cool, and we would go there on school trips, and those was like awesome times. That's like that actually wasn't even as cool as when I was really young and I was on the swim team, and when we would go on these trips to Water Country USA, and, like, when I was, like, 8, Water Country USA was the coolest place in the world. It was so cool, and, and anyway, so my cousin told me about, the Big Bad Wolf. He said, "No, next time you go to Busch Gardens, don't ride the Big Bad Wolf," because when I was little, I rode the ride, and I had for a long time, I had this hat that was so cool, like, in 1985. It was, like, a red hat, and it had, like, wolf eyes on it, and it said "Big Bad Wolf," and it had, like those hats in the '80s that had, like, a back to them. Like, it had a bill here and had, like, a back, kind of like a French Foreign Legion hat, but it had, like, 2 tails in the back that was really cool in the '80s, and I would wear that hat all around. Anyway, he said, "Don't ride the Big Bad Wolf," because, he said he was riding it, and, a kid stood up 2, cars ahead of him, stood up on one of the curves and got decapitated, and his head fell off and blood sprayed all over all the people on the car, and then the kid's head ended up in his lap. So don't ride the and I was like, "The fuck?" So, of course, I didn't ride the ride, and I thought that was total bullshit, but, uh, but I looked it up recently, and, apparently, they shut down the ride because 2 people did die on the ride. One of them was a workman who, like, was, fixing a bolt or something and, stood up and, like, got his head lopped off, like, did de get decapitated. At least that's what it said in the article. I don't know, maybe all that's alleged. I don't know. All I know is what my cousin told me, and the ride doesn't exist anymore. So, um, but yeah. So, the extra terrestrial. That's pretty good. Uh, he says, um, last week here's another Jack Kevorkian Dr. Death joke. Last week, on his latest trial for assisted suicide, Dr. Jack Kevorkian startled a Michigan courtroom when he stood up and shouted, "This is a lynching." Everyone turned to look, and sure enough, he just lynched some old guy. Because Dr. Death was rampant in the 90s. This is a great joke. He says, "A French man who calls himself the human snake was arrested this week after climbing up the side of a Manhattan high rise. Yep, he climbed right up the side of a high rise, just like a snake." Um, let's see. In North Dakota this week, a hunter narrowly escaped death when a pocket knife in his breast pocket deflected a bullet shot by another hunter. Man, we have too many weapons in this country when people are getting shot in the knife. Okay. So, um, oh, he tells the Ben Matlock story, which I already went over. Uh, and okay, so now it's the making of Dirty Work. And they remade Dirty Work this year. Did you guys see that? It was with women, and it's called Do Revenge or some shit. Um, it's just Dirty Work. It's the same movie. They just took Norm's movie and just remade it. Anyway, uh, Mersh pointed that out, by the way. Revenge of the Sis. Um, let's see. Oh yeah, so he's making Dirty Work, and he says, let's see. Many times young people will approach me to ask me how to make it in show business, and I always offer the same foolproof advice. Just remember 3 little words: meet Adam Sandler. The rest pretty much takes care of itself. Sandler had vouched for me to be on SNL. In the summer break, he put me in his first film, Billy Madison. Um, and then he told Robert Simons, who produced Billy Madison, "You can give Normie a movie." And that was that. I went from being a low paid road comic to starring in my own film due to one guy's help. I never thanked Adam for doing all that for me or told him how lost I'd be without his generosity. And that I never will either. That's because I'm a self made man. He says, oh, later in the film, it turns out his buddy is actually his brother. Spoiler alert, he says. um, then it was directed by Bob Saget. So he says, so I got Robert Simons on the phone. "Robert, I think we need to talk about a director." I got just the guy," said Robert. "Is it Frank?" "No, it's Bob Saget." "What are you, nuts?" "Let me ask you this, Norm. What comes to mind when you think of Bob Saget?" "I don't know, a bunch of shit, I guess." They get Bob Saget to be the director. Um, and, they pair him up with Artie Lang because, of the tall, skinny guy, short, fat guy dynamic, right? Laurel and Hardy, Jackie Gleason, Art Carney, Burt Reynolds, Tom DeLuise, Belushi, Aykroyd, Abbott and Costello. And when they pair him up with Artie Lang, they say, but an hour later, bad news. The guy's got a big coke problem. So what? I said I had 6 grams of morphine rushing through me. um, um, let's see. Talks about He talks about the making of Dirty Work. I'm gonna kinda skip over that, but, um, let's see. What are y'all talking about? Um, yeah, but they kinda skip over I'm gonna kinda skip over that. Um, oh, Rachel says, "I wish I could send you a fat super chat for your 1-year Hendo, but I'm broke till tomorrow. I sent you my pennies. Congratulations, Fred. What a great year." Thank you so much, Rachel. I really appreciate you. And, wouldn't be here without you. Really appreciate you and all of your support. And we even got the Dono chat, going. Some people have donated. This is our first night with Dono chat, dono.chat. Look in the video description if anybody wants to use that. Um, but Dirty Work's cool because they get a bunch of people in it that they get, Rickles. Rickles is in it, Chevy Chase. I mean, he's got a great cast, especially Rickles and, Chevy Chase. But, and remember, Norm is, taking the Weekend Update, thing from Chevy Chase because, um, Chevy Chase is the first Weekend Update guy, and then Dennis Miller, or well, then, I guess Bill Murray takes it, and then Dennis Miller, and then Norm. And but Rickles is great. I watched Rickles in the movie Kelly's Heroes this weekend. Classic movie. Kelly's Heroes, great movie with Clint Eastwood. And Rickles is great. Rickles is one of the great comedians of all time. If you ever watch uh Rickles is kind of roast of Reagan, Rickles' roast of Reagan. It's great. Anytime Rickles was on Johnny Carson, I mean, going back and watching the Johnny Carson episodes is like whatever, but there are some great ones. And Rickles is so good because Rickles' thing is that Norm says the first time that he approached Rickles on the set, he's like, hey, Mr. Rickles, I'm just so happy that you're here working on this movie with us, and thank you so much for giving us your time. And he says, "Listen, Norm, let me give you a piece of advice here. Why don't you go back to Canada and go move into a shed and go and talk to your rate and just sit in there and go bah." Right. And then, of course, whenever anybody says anything back to Rickles, Rickles says, "Listen, that's just very unkind. Why are you so mean? Why you have to be so unkind?" He takes it so personally. Rickles is great in Casino, um, especially where, the scene where he's got the cattle prod, and then it's so sad, that scene where, Joe Pesci, hits him, and then he just falls right down on the ground. So sad, but Rickles is the best. He's so awesome. Um, he talked about how, Norm asked him, when Frank Sinatra had that heart attack, he said, "Mr. Rickles, I'm so sorry about your friend Frank." And he said, "Have you talked to him?" And Rickles said, "Yeah, I just saw him in the hospital. He was there going, "Ah." And that's interesting also because Frank Sinatra actually had that heart attack at the Richmond Coliseum. And I remember when it happened because he was he was doing the show at the Richmond Coliseum. Elvis used to play there all the time. It was a little shitty, totally falling down. But but Sinatra was there doing his concert. He had a heart attack on stage, and I remember that he immediately ran off stage and he got his limo and he said, "Get me the hell out of this one horse town. I don't want to die here." And he got flown back up to New York. Okay. Um, so let's finish this up. He goes on to talk about OJ and It's funny because in the book um, he says there was a lot to think about. I flew back to New York and talked with Laurie Joe, Downey, Frank, and Ross. We all agreed that what we had done to OJ had been unconscionable. We had been mostly fueled by lifelong institutionalized wasteism. Now that we'd woken up to that fact, to continue to make OJ jokes while the real killers were at large was out of the question. And for what? So Don Omar could get under his pal's skin at the Brentwood Country Club. The only thing O.J. Simpson was guilty of was being the best running back in history. But while O.J. Simpson had proved himself to be the greatest rusher, I had proven myself to be the greatest rusher to judgment. Nordberg? Yes, Nordberg. Nordberg from The Naked Gun, um, which is a timeless performance, a timeless classic performance. You guys, were you guys around when the OJ trial happened? I mean, I'm an old fella, so I remember it. I even remember watching the verdict because it was in ninth grade geometry class, and they said, "Alright, we're canceling class so we can." They wheeled in one of those TVs on that cart. Remember how they used to have those at school, like the TV on the cart, like the AV cart or whatever? And they wheeled it in, and I was like, "Oh, fuck it, thank goodness we don't have to do this dumbass geometry class." And we watched the OJ verdict, and I still have my little, Time magazine copy of OJ when he got arrested, right? The Juice is Loose. Um, that is that's passenger 57. Um, yeah, and Rachel says, "Yep, same for me in school." Um, let's see. OJ was the second longest trial in American history. Did you know that? After the, McMartin trial. Did you know that? And, I remember watching the Bronco chase. Yeah, the juice is loose, right? There's a man, Al Cowlings driving the car, was the man reported as being Al Cowlings. Yeah, shouts out to Johnny Cochran, uh, Jackie Charles, right? If the glove don't fit, you must have quit. That's my lucky stabbing cap. And Kato Kalin. Yeah, but that was a crazy trial. And that you can buy that Bronco. By the way, that was the coolest Bronco of all time, right? The OJ White Bronco. Um, you can buy that Bronco. I know that because I saw it for sale on the show Pawn Stars on History Channel. Mhm. Um, of course, Norm has a bit about how, later OJ's his rankings, his clout diminished because when he went away finally for the memorabilia thing, he went in there and they were like, "It's OJ," and he was like, "Yeah, I'm the guy. I did that thing." And they were like, "Nope, no, you didn't. Nope, not guilty. You're in here for the memorabilia thing. That's way down in the pecking order." Um, and let's see. Um, oh, he talks about a fancy name for a filthy thing. Um, let's see. Oh, he mentions on page 216 William Faulkner. We covered William Faulkner's um The Pines book. It covers, Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Lawrence Ferlinghetti is the guy who founded City Lights Bookstore, the Beat bookstore that I went to, and, and Coney Island of the Mind is his book, and he mentions William S. Burroughs and then Victor Hugo, and he talks about a filthy name, a nice name for a filthy thing, which he talks about in his special, which is amazing. He talks about the worst part about that filthy thing is that you are found, right? Um, let's see. He slams morphine in this last section, and then let's see, talks about Leno, Letterman, and then let me get to the final chapter here. Final chapter. It can be difficult to define yourself by something that happened so long ago and is gone forever. It's like a fellow at the end of the bar telling no one in particular about the silver medal he won in high school, the one he still wears around his neck. The only thing an old man can tell a young man is that it goes fast, real fast, and if you're not careful, it's too late. Of course, the young man will never understand this truth. How true. How true. Because, I mean, I'm 42. I'm not exactly an old fella, but I'm older. But, I feel like it was yesterday I was watching that OJ thing. It feels like yesterday. I can remember everything about it. Um, and it's funny because I was talking to one of my friends on the phone the other night. Shouts out to Andrew, and we were talking till like 4 in the morning. And it's just funny because like when we're telling stories and stuff, it's like we saw each other. Yeah, I mean we haven't seen each other in like 10 years, but it's like we just were together or we were just hanging out in 11th grade. It's like it just happened. And that happens to me. I know it happens to you guys. It's one of the great things about art, right, is that especially music, for me, like, when I listen to a a certain song, I'll remember the exact time and place that I first heard the song. I remember everything about the day. I remember the way the day felt. I remember the smells. I remember the the people I was talking to. I remember everything that it felt like. And I don't mean that in a nostalgic sense, but art has a great it has an ability to transport you through time, not just to the time of the music or the book itself, but to the time when you first experienced the book or the song or the movie. Um, and it's a bittersweet feeling. It's often it's melancholic, right? It's like it's what do you call it? It's like mutability, or like we talked about with the Anglo-Saxon poems, like the ubi sunt motif, like where are those who have gone before? It's this sense of you were there and you feel like you were just there and you can never get that time and place back again. But the time you're in is the same. It always it keeps marching on. And that the young person can never understand how fast it goes. I mean, think about when you were back in, you know, think about when you were back in like 7th grade history class or something. And I just, the way I think about it is like I was thinking the other day about this 6th grade Spanish class I was in, and the 6th grade Spanish class I was in, it was always right before lunch, and our teacher, when the lunch bell rang, would always tell us, "When you go, go a la izquierda, don't go to the right, go to the left," because when you went to the right, you would have to go past other people's classes that weren't out for lunch yet, and there was, like, this big metal grate right outside the door, and so she said, "Don't go that way because 'cause you'll disturb them, and then you'll be too loud on the grate." So every day when the bell rang, we would walk out the door and then pump fake right and then go or pump fake left and then go right. And we would run right exactly the way she told us not to go. And we would stomp down real hard on that metal grate every day. And it just felt like every day I was in that class. I mean, I know I was in other classes, but every day it's like I was always in that class. And I can remember being there like it was just yesterday. I remember the feeling, like, I remember sitting there and my friend came in and said, "Man, did you hear Kurt Cobain died?" And I was like, "Oh," but he wasn't dead. It was when he had that OD in Rome. And then like 6 weeks later, he came in again and he was like, "No, he really died this time." And but it just moves so fast because now it's all these years later. I know. Sorry, I'm just reminiscing like that with you guys. Um, but that's what this book is kind of making me do. And so at the end, he says, um, at the end, I'm going to read the acknowledgments here because this is pretty good. He says, a lot of people need to be thanked, including ones I forget to thank. All begins with my family, my brother Leslie, and my brother Neil, because he's Canadian, Leslie and Neil. Um, the real writer whom I read and learn from. Thanks to my mother, to whom I owe everything. She's beautiful and kind and generous. This is great. Thanks to my father, who's gone, but thought of fondly and often. We will meet again, Dad, in the place you live, and I cannot imagine. So that's it. And now Norm is dead. So rest in peace to the great Norm Macdonald. And I know you have no truck with the sentimental, but I love you. Norm is one of my heroes and has gotten me through many, many times. And so a big shouts out to our homeboy, the real John Connor out there who supported me so much and who's been a great friend and a support of me, of the show, and to whom I dedicate this analysis. I did this one just for him. Norm Macdonald, based on a true story, not a memoir. Thank you to all the Norm fans out there who got me to do this, like BJ and to Jack. um, Thanks again to all the people who have made us go a whole year here again. So thank you so much to, especially at the top, Jethro and Jerry. Appreciate you so much, so much. Thank you to Rachel Wilson, my friend. I love you so much. Thank you to Andrew Wilson, BPF at the Crucible. Thanks to Real Cooter Brown, to my great homeboy Mikhail, Technor Graphics. Thank you to Natesky, to OK, to Block Party Vintage. Thank you so much to Block Party Vintage. I love you. You're a great friend. Thank you to Kim. Shouts out to Kim out there. I love you so much. Shouts out to Claire, to Kristen, Slow Boy Whiteboard. Shouts out to Jay Dyer, to Jamie, to Kristen Haggard. Shouts out to David Patrick Harry, Church of the Eternal Logos, to Genghis, to Jack, to Amptown, to Ratsky, to Rat Tail, to Rat Splatigan. Shouts out to all my friends, all my family out there. Shouts out to Rollin, who was here with us. Shouts out to Paul in real life. Shouts out to Woody, Merch. Shouts out to Andrew. Um, Shouts out to Jeff over there in England, to David. Um, Shouts out to my sister and to my parents and to everybody else. Thank you all so much for getting me here, and for being with me here for this whole year. We got so much more to come. We're going to keep building the channel. We're going to keep just talking about literature. And I hope, this is a place where people can come and just listen and interact and think about, you know, um, life, art, meaning, literature, um, our relationship to God, our relationship to each other, which all art is about. We can talk about all of the things that literature brings us that are prescient in life and that make us reflect upon our situation. I mean, look at the white noise. Look at the white noise stream, right? I think it's a perfect example of that. That again, that happened early on with the Lindsey Graham thing and the Julius Caesar stream, and then we did the Oscars stream, right? All the world's a stage. Um, that's kind of happened continuously for us. So we hope to keep doing that, talking about movies, talking about books. If you want to support me, please do. You can look at the links. I got a bunch of people to thank for super chats. So let me get into some of these super chats. Thank you so much to, let's see. Oh, thank you so much to Rachel for that $4.90 on PayPal. Really appreciate you. Thank you for that $5, Rachel. Thank you so much. Um, Shouts out to Rob for that $10 on PayPal. Really appreciate you. Thank you so much, homeboy. Shouts out to John Connor out there for that $15 cash app. He says, um, for, he says, forgetting that. Okay. So, do you want to hear, Johnny Carson's 9/11 joke? No, it was 911. No, that was a national tragedy, and here's Johnny Carson's, 911 joke. Um, so he calls and he says, Johnny Carson's having a heart attack, and he says, "Yeah, I feel like there's a yak on my chest." So, shouts out to John Connor for that 15 bucks. Appreciate you. Shouts out to Jason for that $5 on, PayPal. Really appreciate you, homeboy. Thank you so much. Um, I got a bunch more here to cover, so bear with me. Yes. Yeah, we're still going, Donna. I know. I can't believe we've been going this long. Thanks for sticking with me, everybody. Let's see. Shouts out to, again, Kristen for that $20 cash app. Appreciate you. Shouts out to Kristen who sent me that $20 Cash App the other night. Big supporter of the channel and go to Slow Boy Whiteboard. Thank you so much, Kristen. Good friend. Shouts out to our homeboy Jethro, who sent me $20 as a anniversary gift on this for this 1 year anniversary. Thank you so much, Jethro, my brother. I appreciate you. Shouts out to Allie for that $15 on Cash App. And let's see, Jonathan Burgess sent $5 on Cash App. Real John Connor, who has sent, he's just such a big supporter. Thank you so much. Let's see. Let's look at the next one here. And yes, again, thank you to Rachel for that. Shouts out to Rob for that for that $10 PayPal. Shouts out to Jason. Um, shouts out to oh yeah, this is the big one. So we got a sponsored oh no, this is BLA Norm Stream Art. Yo, thank you to $10 to yeah, Pack Hajowski. Thank you to Hajowski out there for that $10. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you. Shouts out to Thomas Henderson for $10, to Amy for $5. Let's see. Ed sent me $5. I don't know if I gave him a shout out for that one yet. Shouts out to Ed for that $5. Um, and let's see. Shouts out to Mixkey who sends 21 bucks for me, Kank. Thank you so much. You are the Kank. Thank you so much, Mixkey Techmark Graphics. Yo, also check out the new thumbnail art we got from our homeboy iPack Arts, who is doing our thumbnail art. He also does the work for JD over at Jay's Analysis, Jay Dyer, and he does amazing art. So hit him up, iPack Arts. He's on Instagram. He does I'm really happy. I think he's that's something else that's taking us kinda helping us level up here. Um, let's see. Shouts out to John Adams who sends $5 and says, um, OJ Simpson was in a different kind of courtroom this week, attempting to regain custody of his 2 children. In order to prove to the court how much he loves his kids, OJ pointed out quote, "Hey, they're still alive, aren't they?" Oh my god. Thank you to John Adams. Appreciate you, homeboy. Um, Shouts out to Lyndon, who sent $25 the other day and said, Bazed, one of my favorite channels. Thank you so much. Um, let's see. Yes, and a while back we had Brian who sponsored a stream for $100. Thank you so much. Thanks to Buster who sent some money. Um, let's check the super chats. Super chats, you guys. Thanks for bearing with me here through the super chats. Let's see. Again, we had that $3.99 from Amptown. We had $10 from Day Gyre in the dono chat. And then let's look at the super chats. We had Genghis, yeah, sent $9.99. We had Maddie who sent $4.99. Well, I ranked my top 5 comedians. Again, that was like Rodney, Martin Lawrence, Steve Harvey, by the way. Steve Harvey, one of the great Americans of all time. Love Steve Harvey. Steve Harvey for press. Steve Harvey, Martin Lawrence, Rodney, Rickles, and Norm, I guess. Of course, Nick Mullen. Nick Mullen's the greatest like living comedian. Shouts out to Elias for that $4.99. Um, again, imagine that the good guys won every single war. Shouts out to DJ for that $2.99 Australian. I wouldn't know Super Dave without Norm. I'm not part of this. Shouts out to Andrew Turner for that $5. Have a Red Bull on me. And then Herman, who sent $15 in that last one with Chase. Um, and I think that's about it. Did I get it, you guys? Did I get it all? I think I did. So I think that's it. If I forgot anybody, please forgive me and I will get to you next time if I didn't see it. You can support me anytime. um, through any of the links. You can sponsor streams. I'm trying to get to all we got a bunch of sponsor streams to cover. So if I haven't gotten to yours yet, I haven't forgotten you, and I'm still working on them. We're still gonna be doing those. The next book that we're gonna cover is gonna be Alex Garland's The Beach, and we're gonna talk about the movie as well, the Danny Boyle movie. Um, and then we're gonna do Titus Andronicus. We've got Panicle Leibowitz coming up. We got Joseph Conrad. We've got the Steven Seagal stream. We've got the Wes Anderson stream that we got to do for John. We got a bunch of stuff we got to cover. So if I haven't gotten to you, please, I haven't forgotten you. All right, y'all. That's about all I got for tonight. I love y'all. Um, and let's keep living out there, y'all. LIVIN. It's February. All right. I'll see y'all soon. Okay. Peace.